I am Chloe, 33 years old, and for a decade, I quietly paid my parents' mortgage while they treated me like nothing more than a living ATM. At our lavish Thanksgiving dinner, my father raised his expensive crystal glass and joyfully announced that my older brother was inheriting the very house I had been financially keeping afloat. When my mother publicly dismissed my decade of payments as basic daughterly duty, I did not cry or throw a tantrum. Instead, I smiled, knowing a massive legal secret that would soon leave all of them completely empty-handed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who severely underestimated your worth. The clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal wine glass sliced through the low hum of conversation. My father Richard stood at the head of our massive mahogany dining table. It was Thanksgiving, and the room was packed with extended family aunts, uncles, and cousins, who only showed up for the free, expensive catered food and the vintage champagne my parents loved to show off. The dining room of the Connecticut estate looked like a magazine cover perfectly lit, smelling of roasted turkey and sage, with a blazing fire in the hearth. I sat near the middle of the table nursing my water, already exhausted from hours of my mother Barbara making passive-aggressive comments about my outfit and my single status. Richard cleared his throat, waiting until every single eye in the room was locked onto him. He loved an audience. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and offered a broad, practiced smile. "I want to thank everyone for gathering here tonight in our beautiful home." My father began, his voice booming with artificial warmth. "Your mother and I have reached an age where we must look toward the future and secure our legacy. We recently sat down with our attorney to finalize our estate planning, and we wanted to share some joyous news with the family." I felt a slight knot form in my stomach, though my face remained perfectly neutral. Beside me sat my sister-in-law, Maya. Maya was a brilliant African-American woman who worked as a senior auditor at a top financial firm in the city. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, shooting me a quick, wary glance. Across the table sat her husband, my 35-year-old brother, Tyler. Tyler was the undisputed golden child of the family, despite being a serial failed crypto investor who had bankrupted 3 separate startup ventures in the past 5 years. He was currently leaning back in his chair, swirling his wine with an unbearably smug smirk plastered across his face. "We have decided that upon our passing, this entire estate and all our remaining assets will be left solely to Tyler," my father announced proudly. A heavy, awkward silence descended over the extended family. A few cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. My aunt coughed into her napkin. Leaving everything to one child while the other was sitting right there at the table was a blatant slap in the face, even for a family as dysfunctional as ours. My father did not miss a beat, completely ignoring the thick tension in the room. "Tyler is the man of the house, the one who carries our family name. He is currently working on some highly visionary digital currency projects, and he needs the solid foundation of this estate to rebuild his investment portfolio." He then turned his gaze directly toward me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of paternal affection. "Chloe is a 33-year-old single woman. She has her little corporate job as a supply chain director. She has no husband, no children, and no real legacy to uphold. She can fend for herself. Tyler needs this house." Tyler raised his glass toward my father, chuckling softly. "Thanks, Dad. It takes real capital to make big moves in the crypto space. You are making the right choice." I sat perfectly still. The sheer audacity of the moment was almost suffocating. For the past 10 years, I had been the one transferring thousands of dollars every single month to keep this exact roof over their heads. I was the one sacrificing my own savings, while Tyler lived rent-free in the renovated guest house, playing tech mogul with their retirement funds. Before I could even process the absolute disrespect of my father's speech, my mother Barbara decided it was her turn to twist the knife. She leaned forward, resting her diamond-ringed hands on the table, fixing me with a condescending glare. "Now, Chloe, do not give us that sour look," Barbara said loudly, making sure everyone was listening. "I know you have been helping out with the mortgage payments, but let us be perfectly clear. That is not an investment. That is simply rent for your childhood. It is your basic daughterly duty to give back to the parents who clothed and fed you. You owe us that much." A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Even my Uncle George looked physically revolted by the statement. Maya, usually composed and professional, dropped her fork onto her plate with a loud clatter. She opened her mouth to speak clearly, ready to defend me against this insane revision of history. Tyler immediately kicked Maya under the table. "Shut up," he hissed at his wife, his voice low but aggressive. "Do not ruin this for me." Barbara caught Maya's defensive posture and immediately went on the attack. "Do not interfere." Maya, my mother, snapped, her tone laced with racial microaggressions she frequently used to keep my sister-in-law in her place. "You were not raised in a traditional household like ours. You do not understand how real families operate and support their elders. Keep your auditing opinions to yourself." I did not cry. 10 years ago, I would have burst into tears at the audacity of my mother calling a decade of mortgage payments basic daughterly duty. But at 33, my tears had dried up, replaced by cold clarity. I simply smiled. It was a deliberate smile that did not reach my eyes. I wiped my mouth, folded my napkin, and placed my fork on the plate. The sharp clink of metal against porcelain echoed loudly in the sudden silence of the dining room. I looked directly at my mother, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me wounded. Tyler could not handle the silence. He thrived on my emotional reactions, and my calm demeanor agitated him. He leaned back in his dining chair, swirling a glass of expensive red wine that I had paid for. He let out a condescending laugh. "Oh, come on, Chloe. Look at you acting all high and mighty. You are completely overreacting. It is just a house. And let us be honest about your situation. You are a supply chain director. It is a glorified warehouse job. You track cardboard boxes for a living. I am building a financial empire. I am making investments that will secure this family wealth. I need the equity of this estate to leverage my next crypto venture. You do not even have a husband or kids to leave anything to." I kept my voice perfectly level. "Visionary investments, Tyler. Are we talking about the startup that collapsed 3 years ago, or the exchange that went bankrupt last spring?" From where I sit, tracking those cardboard boxes, I see a continuous pattern of catastrophic financial failures funded exclusively by Mom and Dad. The blood drained from the face of Tyler. He slammed his wine glass down, spilling a red stain onto the pristine tablecloth. Before he could launch a defensive tirade, my mother intervened. Barbara always leapt to shield her golden child. "Chloe Elizabeth, that is quite enough. You will not disrespect your brother at my table. Your jealousy is absolutely suffocating. You are acting exactly like you did 10 years ago. It is honestly pathetic that you have not grown up." The mention of 10 years ago felt like a physical blow. Everyone at the table knew exactly what she was referring to. When I was 23, I had saved $40,000 to fund my master's degree. I worked double shifts and denied myself every luxury. 2 weeks before tuition was due, my parents secretly drained the joint account my name was attached to and handed every penny to Tyler. His grand justification was that he needed to travel through Europe to find himself. When I confronted them, devastated, my mother told me his mental well-being was an emergency while my education was merely a luxury. "You are holding on to a decade-old grudge over a simple backpacking trip," my mother continued, her tone dripping with mock pity. "Your brother needed cultural exposure to become the brilliant entrepreneur he is today. You were being selfish then, demanding we prioritize your little school project over his personal growth. And you are being incredibly selfish now, expecting to inherit a house you merely helped maintain out of basic familial obligation. You should be honored we allowed you to contribute to our household." The sheer delusion in her words hung heavy in the air. I looked across the table at Maya, the wife of Tyler. Maya was 34, a fiercely intelligent African-American woman who had fought tooth and nail to become a senior auditor at one of the country's top financial firms. She was the only person in this room who understood the value of a dollar. Maya had been staring at her plate, her jaw clenched tight, but the revisionist history was finally too much to stomach. Maya placed her hands flat on the table and looked directly at Barbara. With all due respect, Barbara, that is not how finances or family obligations work. Maya said, her voice steady but vibrating with suppressed anger. Chloe has not just been helping out. I have seen the bank statements Tyler left on the kitchen counter. Chloe has been paying the entire principal, interest, taxes, and insurance on this property for 120 consecutive months. That is not basic duty. That is absolute financial exploitation. You cannot legally or morally cut her out of an estate she has entirely funded. The dining room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. No one dared to challenge my mother in her own home, especially not an in-law. The face of my father hardened, but the reaction of my mother was swift and venomous. Her eyes narrowed into terrifying slits as she locked her gaze onto Maya. She did not yell. Instead, she lowered her voice to a lethal, condescending purr, packing decades of elitism into a single breath. Maya, I realize you were not raised in a traditional household like ours, my mother said smoothly, launching a deliberate racist microaggression that made my blood boil. I know your background is different, and your family perhaps did not share our values regarding legacy. But in real families, we do not audit familial generosity. We do not treat our parents like transactional business partners. You simply do not understand how heritage operates in our circles. I suggest you remember your place at this table and keep your accounting opinions to yourself. Maya went rigid. The cruel insult was designed to humiliate her based on race and her self-made background. My mother absolutely despised the fact that Maya was highly educated, viewing her as an outsider threatening the ecosystem she had curated for Tyler. Tyler said absolutely nothing to defend his wife. He just looked away cowardly, avoiding the furious and disgusted glare of Maya. He cared more about securing his inheritance than protecting the mother of his child from the relentless bigotry of his own mother. My name is Chloe, and as I watched Tyler do absolutely nothing to defend his wife from the blatant bigotry of my mother, the silence that followed was deafening. Tyler stared firmly at his half-eaten turkey, his jaw tight, but his mouth shut. He chose his inheritance over his wife, a cowardly decision that surprised absolutely no one. Maya looked at him, her dark eyes flashing with a profound mixture of betrayal and absolute disgust. She slowly pulled her hands off the table and sat back in her chair, retreating into a stony, impenetrable silence. I watched the exchange and felt a strange sense of liberation wash over me. For 10 years, I had held on to a misguided hope that if I just paid enough, sacrificed enough, and stayed quiet enough, these people would finally love me. But sitting in this opulent dining room listening to the echoes of arrogance from my father and the cruelty from my mother, the final thread of that desperate hope completely snapped. I did not yell or throw my glass. Instead, I reached for my linen napkin, calmly wiped the corners of my mouth, and dropped the fabric onto my plate. The delicate sound of it settling over the silverware was the only noise in the room. I placed both hands on the edge of the heavy mahogany table and pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Every head turned to watch me as I stood to my full height. I smoothed my skirt, took one final look at the crystal chandeliers and the curated perfection of a family that never truly existed, and then I locked eyes with my father, Well then, I said, my voice steady and echoing clearly across the dining room. Since the estate is officially settled and the inheritance is decided, the sole heir can take over the mortgage starting tomorrow. For a split second, nobody moved. Then my father let out a sharp, barking laugh. It was a condescending sound that signaled the rest of the table to join in. Tyler chuckled, shaking his head as if I had just told a terrible joke. My Uncle George offered a nervous chuckle, and my mother let out a high-pitched scoff. They genuinely believed I was throwing a tantrum. They thought I was a helpless spinster daughter, making an empty threat because my feelings were hurt. They assumed that by next week, I would be transferring another massive payment into their account just to stay in their good graces. You are being incredibly dramatic, Chloe, my mother said, waving her hand dismissively. Sit down and finish your dinner. Stop trying to ruin Thanksgiving for everyone else just because you are unhappy with your own life choices. We are not discussing this anymore. I did not sit down. I did not break eye contact. I will not be paying another dime, I stated, enunciating every single syllable clearly. You have made it perfectly clear who the priority is in this household. Tyler is a visionary entrepreneur. Tyler is the man of the house. Tyler is the future of this family. Therefore, Tyler can pay the $5,000 mortgage on the first of the month. I am officially done. The laughter abruptly died. The smirk vanished from the face of Tyler. The color began to drain from the cheeks of my mother as she realized I was actually stepping away from the table and walking toward the grand foyer. "Get back here right now," my father commanded. His voice dropped the jovial patriarch tone and adopted the aggressive booming baritone he used to intimidate his corporate employees. "I am not finished speaking to you, Chloe Elizabeth. You do not walk away from me in my own house." I kept walking, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor of the hallway. I reached the front closet, grabbed my tailored wool coat, and slipped it over my shoulders. I pulled my car keys from my pocket, the metal jingling loudly in the quiet space. "If you walk out that door, you are done!" my father roared, shoving his chair back and storming into the hallway. His face was purple with rage. "Do you hear me? If you walk out of this house right now, you are cut out of this family forever. You will get nothing. You will be nothing to us. Do not expect us to be there when you inevitably fail." I paused with my hand resting on the heavy brass doorknob. I turned slowly to face him. He looked furious, but behind the rage, I could see a tiny flicker of genuine panic. He knew deep down that without my monthly transfers, their entire luxurious lifestyle would collapse within 30 days. I looked at his red face, at my mother, hovering nervously behind him, and at Tyler peeking cowardly from the dining room archway. "Thanks for saving me the lawyer fees," I said softly. I turned the knob, pulled the heavy oak door open, and stepped out into the crisp November air. I shut the door firmly behind me, cutting off the sound of my father shouting my name. The cold air hit my face, but I had never felt warmer. Walking down the long, illuminated driveway toward my car, I felt an incredible weight lifting off my shoulders. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer their financial safety net. I slid into the driver's seat of my car and locked the doors. The quiet isolation of the vehicle wrapped around me like a protective shield. I started the engine, the low hum providing a steady rhythm to my racing thoughts. Before putting the car in drive, I pulled my phone from my purse. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened my secure banking application, bypassing the personal checking account my parents used to monitor. I navigated straight to my commercial portfolio. The screen loaded, displaying a meticulously managed commercial real estate account. At the top of the screen, the legal entity name glowed brightly in the dark cabin of the car. New Beginnings Holdings, LLC. Below the title sat a massive, healthy balance, the result of a decade of quiet, brilliant investments my parents knew absolutely nothing about. I tapped on the property asset list. The very first address on the legal roster was the sprawling Connecticut estate I had just walked out of. I stared at the screen, a genuine, powerful smile finally breaking across my face. They thought they were leaving the family home to Tyler. They thought they owned the walls they slept in. But they did not own anything. They were just arrogant tenants living on borrowed time, completely unaware that the landlord had just officially terminated their free lease. I placed the phone in the cup holder, shifted the car into drive, and pulled out of the estate, leaving their delusions in the rearview mirror. Exactly 1 month passed since that Thanksgiving dinner. 30 days of absolute silence from my family, which suited me perfectly. I had not received a single text, missed call, or email apologizing for the blatant disrespect I endured at that mahogany dining table. They were likely assuming I was at home, sulking in my supposed misery, waiting for them to grant me permission to resume my duties as the family cash cow. They were entirely wrong. I was not sulking. I was thriving. I sat in my corner office on the 40th floor of a sleek downtown skyscraper overlooking the sprawling city below. As the director of supply chain for a global logistics firm, my days were a masterclass in high-stakes negotiation, risk management, and precision. Tyler loved to mock my career as a glorified warehouse job, but his extreme ignorance was just another testament to his overall financial illiteracy. Right at this exact moment, I was reviewing the final clauses of a $60 million international shipping contract. My desk was immaculate, my mind was sharp, and my personal bank accounts were flourishing. I had spent the last decade quietly securing my future while my parents burned through their retirement funds to bankroll the entrepreneurial delusions of my brother. They had mistaken my quiet financial support for weakness. They had mistaken my willingness to pay the mortgage for submission to their toxic hierarchy. Now the safety net was officially gone, and the financial freefall was about to begin. I signed the last page of the vendor agreement with a smooth, decisive stroke of my fountain pen. I handed the heavy leather-bound folder to my assistant, thanking her for her exceptional hard work on the merger. As she walked out and closed the heavy glass door behind her, the serene silence of my executive office was suddenly shattered. My personal cell phone, resting face down on the polished mahogany desk, buzzed aggressively. The screen lit up, flashing a bright notification. It was a message from my mother, Barbara. It had been exactly 30 days since I walked out of their house, and this was her very first attempt at communication. There was no polite greeting. There was no asking how my month had been, or checking if I had driven home safely that night. There was certainly no apology for publicly cutting me out of a will for a house I secretly owned. The text message contained exactly 2 sentences, typed entirely in frantic all-capital letters. The mortgage is due. The bank just called, pay it now. I picked up the phone, staring at the glowing screen. A genuine, unrestrained laugh bubbled up in my chest. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was breathtaking. For 10 consecutive years, I had transferred exactly $5,000 into their joint account on the 28th of every single month without fail. Today was the first of the month. The grace period had ended, the automatic draft had officially failed, and the aggressive collections department had come calling. My mother was not asking for a favor or pleading for assistance. She was issuing a direct command to a subordinate. She honestly believed that despite essentially disowning me in favor of Tyler, I would dutifully log into my banking application and cover their massive living expenses just to keep the peace. I tapped the screen, opening the keyboard. I did not write a long paragraph explaining my deeply hurt feelings. I did not remind her of the humiliating Thanksgiving toast. I typed exactly 2 words and hit send, ask Tyler. I set the phone back down on the desk, leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, and waited for the inevitable blast. It took less than 15 seconds for the digital explosion to begin. My phone began vibrating violently against the wood, lighting up with a rapid-fire barrage of incredibly toxic messages. The incoming texts read like the frantic, unhinged scribblings of a cornered narcissist. You ungrateful brat. How dare you speak to your mother this way? You owe us everything. Who do you think you are? You are acting like a spoiled, jealous child. The messages kept pouring in, each one more vicious than the last. Tyler is busy building a real company. He cannot be bothered with trivial household bills. This house is your responsibility. You are going to die an ugly, lonely spinster if you keep treating your flesh and blood like this. Pay the bill right this second, or you will regret it. I watched the text bubbles stack up on my screen, calmly sipping my sparkling water. The financial desperation was palpable. Barbara was lashing out viciously because the grand illusion of her wealthy lifestyle was finally fracturing. Then came the final fatal threat. If you do not transfer that money right now, I am calling the CEO of your company. I will tell your boss what a horrible, abusive daughter you are. I will have you fired from your little warehouse job. I smiled at the screen. Calling the chief executive officer of a Fortune 500 company to complain that a 33-year-old senior director was not paying her parents' residential mortgage was a level of suburban delusion I could hardly comprehend. She was flailing blindly. The harsh reality of their impending bankruptcy was finally crashing down on her, and instead of taking any accountability, she was trying to terrorize her primary funding source into submission. I picked up the device, tapped on her contact profile, scrolled down to the very bottom of the screen, and firmly pressed the block caller button. The incessant buzzing immediately ceased. The silence in my office returned peaceful and deeply satisfying. I placed the phone back down completely unfazed and turned my attention back to my dual monitors to review a secondary logistics spreadsheet. I had a massive global supply chain to manage, and the financial ruin of Richard and Barbara was no longer my concern. About 10 minutes passed in blissful, highly productive silence. Then the intercom on my desk phone chimed sharply. I pressed the flashing button, expecting my assistant to confirm our upcoming international conference call. Instead, the voice of the front desk receptionist came through the speaker, tight with severe anxiety and barely concealed panic. Ms. Chloe, I am so sorry to interrupt your work. We have a highly aggressive situation down here in the main lobby. It is your brother Tyler. He is screaming at the security guards demanding to see you, and he is making a massive violent scene. Before I could even instruct her to contact the authorities, a loud crash echoed from the hallway outside my executive suite. The heavy frosted glass door to my office was violently shoved open, slamming against the rubber wall stop with a sickening crack. Tyler stood in the threshold, panting heavily, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He had completely bypassed the security checkpoint on the ground floor, likely slipping into an executive elevator behind a legitimate employee. His designer suit jacket was rumpled, his tie was crooked, and he looked entirely unhinged against the backdrop of my immaculate, highly controlled corporate environment. Two breathless building security guards appeared in the hallway seconds behind him, reaching for his shoulders, but Tyler aggressively shoved them off and barged directly toward my desk. I will handle this, I said calmly to the guards, raising a single hand to halt them. Just wait right outside the door, please. The guards hesitated but nodded, stepping back into the corridor while keeping a vigilant watch. I remained seated in my ergonomic chair, my hands resting lightly on the polished mahogany. I did not flinch. I did not stand up to match his aggressive posture. I simply looked at him with the detached curiosity one might reserve for a stray animal that had wandered into a pristine building. Tyler reached into his tailored jacket pocket, pulled out a crumpled piece of premium stationery, and threw it violently across my desk. The paper caught the air, fluttering erratically before slapping directly against my chest and falling into my lap. "Do you have any idea what you have just done?" he screamed, his voice cracking with unchecked hysteria. He slammed both of his hands flat onto my desk, leaning over the surface in a pathetic attempt to physically intimidate me. I glanced down at the paper resting in my lap. It was a formal past due notice from the primary mortgage lender of the estate, printed in bold red ink. I looked back up at his furious face, my expression completely neutral. "I assume I have finally forced you to look at a utility bill for the very first time in your adult life," I replied, my voice dangerously soft. "You vindictive psycho!" Tyler spat, pointing a trembling finger inches from my face. "Mom was at the Azure Wellness Spa this morning. She went to check out at the front desk after a massive luxury treatment package, and her platinum credit card was completely declined. Declined in front of half the country club wives in Connecticut. Do you know why? Because the bank forcefully attempted to auto-draft the overdue estate mortgage from her emergency backup account, which instantly triggered a catastrophic overdraft cascade. You completely froze her liquid assets. The absolute absurdity of the situation almost made me laugh out loud. My mother was enjoying a lavish, multi-thousand-dollar spa day while simultaneously ignoring a delinquent mortgage payment, and somehow her public humiliation at the checkout counter was my fault. It was a breathtaking display of the financial incompetence I had been subsidizing for a decade. That sounds like a severe cash flow problem, Tyler. Perhaps you should liquidate some of your visionary digital currency to cover her hot stone massage. "I am not playing games with you, Chloe!" he roared, his voice echoing off the glass walls of my office. "You are going to log into your banking portal right now. You are going to transfer exactly $4,500 to the joint account to cover the overdraft fees, the mortgage balance, and the spa bill. You are going to fix the massive mess you just created, and you are going to do it before I leave this room." I slowly reached down and picked up the crumpled past due bank notice from my lap. I smoothed out the wrinkled edges with deliberate, agonizing slowness. I examined the bold red lettering detailing the impending late penalties. Tyler watched me, a smug, triumphant sneer briefly replacing his rage. He honestly believed his aggressive, unhinged display had broken my resolve. He thought the obedient check-writing sister had returned. Without breaking eye contact, I smoothly pivoted my chair to the right. I held the bank notice directly over the heavy-duty industrial paper shredder sitting beside my filing cabinet. I dropped the paper into the metallic slot. The machine instantly roared to life with a loud, aggressive whirring sound, violently chewing the bank demand into hundreds of tiny, illegible confetti strips. I turned back to face him, folding my hands neatly on the desk. "No," I said simply. The smugness vanished from his face, replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated shock. His mouth opened and closed, struggling to process the blatant rejection of his ultimate authority. When the reality finally registered, his shock quickly morphed into a rabid, cornered panic. "You think you are so untouchable sitting in this fancy office?" Tyler hissed, his tone dropping into a malicious, venomous threat. "I will completely ruin you. I will go on every single social media platform and expose what a toxic, abusive, ungrateful daughter you really are. I will tag your company. I will tag your executive board. I will tell the entire world that you are a selfish, ugly spinster who maliciously abandoned her elderly parents to freeze on the streets. I will completely obliterate your professional reputation." I looked at my brother. I looked at the golden child who had drained my college fund, who had mocked my career, and who was now standing in my office throwing a toddler tantrum because the free ride was officially over. I reached under the lip of my mahogany desk and pressed the silent corporate security alarm button mounted beneath the wood. "You cannot ruin a reputation built on actual hard work, Tyler," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "But you are welcome to try. Now get out of my building." Before he could launch another pathetic threat, the office door flew open. 4 heavily built corporate security officers charged into the room. They did not hesitate or ask for compliance. 2 of the men immediately grabbed Tyler by his arms, physically lifting him off his feet and dragging him forcefully backward away from my desk. "Get your hands off me!" Tyler shrieked, kicking wildly as they hauled him out into the hallway. "I will sue this entire company. You are dead to us, Chloe. Dead." I watched calmly as they dragged him down the long corridor. His furious screams echoed through the entire executive floor, growing fainter and fainter until the heavy metal doors of the freight elevator slid shut, cutting him off completely. The silence returned sweet and profound. I adjusted my blazer, pulled the shipping contract back toward me, and continued my workday as if a minor pest had just been swatted away. That night, I sat on the plush sofa in my downtown penthouse, sipping a glass of vintage Pinot Noir. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting the quiet peace of my new reality. The silence of my phone had been absolute since the incident at the office. I assumed my family was currently drowning in a frantic sea of unpaid bills and canceled credit cards. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently against the glass coffee table, shattering the quiet atmosphere of the room. I picked it up, expecting another unhinged barrage of texts from Barbara, or perhaps a pathetic voicemail from my father. Instead, the caller ID displayed a name that genuinely surprised me. It was Maya. I frowned, swiped the screen, and answered the call. "Hello." "Chloe, thank God you answered," Maya gasped. Her usually poised professional voice was completely fractured, breathless, and laced with absolute panic. "Listen to me very carefully. You need to lock your doors right now. I am already perfectly secure," I assured her, my voice dropping to a calm, steady register to counter her frantic energy. "Tyler was just physically dragged out of my corporate lobby by 4 security guards. He cannot get anywhere near me." "Are you safe?" A ragged, wet sob tore through the speaker. The sound was completely jarring. Maya was a woman of immaculate composure, a shark in the boardroom who never let anyone see her bleed. Hearing her break down like this sent a spike of genuine alarm straight through my chest. "He took it. Chloe," she wept, her voice trembling with a mixture of profound devastation and blinding rage. "He took the money." I sat up straight, placing my wine glass on the table. "Took what money, Maya? Take a deep breath and tell me exactly what happened." "He just stormed into the house like a lunatic," Maya explained, her breath hitching. "He was screaming about how you refused to pay your parents' mortgage, how you shredded the bank notice right in his face. He was pacing the living room, throwing things, saying he had to fix your mess before the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. Then he grabbed his keys and sped off again." Maya paused, taking a shaky breath. I had a horrible feeling. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint banking portal. I wanted to make sure he had not done anything stupid in his rage. But I was too late. He completely drained our emergency savings account. He transferred exactly $4,500 to your mother. My stomach twisted. Tyler had actually stolen from his own family to maintain the pathetic illusion that he was the wealthy savior of the estate. Maya, I said softly. It gets worse, she sobbed, the anger finally burning through her tears. That was not just a generic savings account. That was the medical fund for our son. We have been saving for months to cover the out-of-pocket costs for the specialized physical therapy of Leo. Tyler knew exactly what that money was for. He stole the healthcare money of his own child to pay the mortgage on a house he lives in for free just to keep up his disgusting fake billionaire facade for your parents. The sheer depravity of his actions hung heavy in the silent air of my penthouse. Tyler was not just a lazy golden child anymore. He was an active parasite destroying his own wife and son. Maya let out another broken sob. I do not even know what to do. I feel so stupid. I trusted him. He handles the investment accounts while I manage the day-to-day bills. If he is willing to steal the medical fund of our son, what else has he done? I am sitting here crying on my kitchen floor like an absolute fool. I listened to the woman who had bravely stood up for me at that toxic Thanksgiving table. I remembered how my mother had degraded her and how Tyler had cowed into silence. Maya did not need my pity. She needed a reality check. Maya, listen to me right now, I said, my tone shifting from comforting to razor sharp. You are not a fool. You are a senior auditor at one of the top financial firms in the country. You tear apart corporate tax frauds for a living. You hunt down hidden offshore accounts before breakfast. Stop crying and audit your own husband. The line went dead silent. The crying instantly stopped. He left his laptop on the kitchen counter when he stormed out. Maya said, her voice suddenly dropping an octave. The panic was gone, replaced by the icy, calculating precision of a woman who had just found her weapon. Put me on speakerphone, I commanded. Do not hang up. I heard the rustle of fabric, the clicking of a laptop hinging open, and the rapid-fire sound of her manicured fingers flying across the keyboard. Tyler was arrogant, but he was also incredibly lazy. He used the same variations of passwords for everything. It took Maya less than 60 seconds to bypass his basic security protocols and gain full access to his digital life. What do you see? I asked, leaning forward on my couch. Oh my God! Maya breathed, the horror in her voice, chilling me to the bone. Chloe, it is all gone. What is gone? Everything, she said, her voice shaking with raw fury. He completely liquidated his entire 401k 3 months ago. The balance is zero. He took out massive penalties for early withdrawal. I could hear her rapidly clicking through different tabs, her breathing growing heavier with every new catastrophic discovery. He opened 2 new credit cards in my name, she whispered, her voice rising in panic. He forged my digital signature. They are both maxed out. $30,000 in consumer debt. And the cars. Chloe, he took out high-interest title loans against both of our vehicles. We do not even own the cars in our driveway anymore. The lenders hold the titles. The scope of his financial destruction was breathtaking. He had not just failed at business. He had actively cannibalized every single asset his wife had worked tirelessly to build. Look at his business accounts, I instructed, my mind racing. Look at the crypto startup he is always bragging about to my father. More furious typing echoed through the speaker. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped the lips of Maya. It is a shell, she spat. The startup does not exist. There is zero revenue. He has been taking personal loans and moving the money through different LLCs to make it look like operational income. He is running a literal Ponzi scheme with our personal credit. He owes over $200,000 to private lenders. The golden boy of the family, the visionary entrepreneur who was supposed to inherit the grand estate, was nothing but a bankrupt fraud. He had built an entire empire out of lies funded by my decade of mortgage payments and the stolen security of his own wife. Maya, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. You need to freeze your credit right now. Lock down every single account with your name on it. Call the fraud department for those credit cards. Then pack a bag for you and Leo. I am leaving him, Maya stated firmly, the last trace of hesitation completely vanishing. I am taking my son, and I am leaving that parasitic loser tonight. He is going to come home to an empty house. Do not just leave him, I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. You need to legally decimate him. Get to a safe place tonight. Tomorrow we hire the most ruthless divorce attorney in the city. Tyler wanted to play games with our finances. It is time we show him what a real audit looks like. The morning fog was still clinging to the high-rise windows of the financial district when I pushed open the heavy glass door of a discreet, dimly lit coffee shop. Maya was already seated in a secluded corner booth, her back pressed against the dark mahogany paneling. She was nursing a black espresso, her posture rigid and defensive. She wore a sharp-tailored charcoal pantsuit, projecting the aura of a corporate assassin preparing for an inevitable war, rather than a devastated wife mourning the sudden collapse of her marriage. I slid into the leather booth across from her, placing my handbag on the seat beside me. She did not offer a polite greeting or engage in meaningless small talk. Instead, she immediately pushed a thick, heavy manila folder across the scratched wooden table. I opened the cover. The spreadsheets inside were a complete bloodbath of red ink, highlighted deficits, and alarming negative balances. Maya had not slept a single minute. She had spent the entire night ruthlessly tearing apart the financial architecture of her husband, and the resulting internal audit was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. Look at page 4. Maya instructed, her voice dropping into a low mechanical monotone that chilled me to the bone. He did not just take the medical fund of our son. He forged my digital signature on 3 separate high-yield personal loans. He completely liquidated my stock options from my previous accounting firm without my authorization. He funneled over $150,000 into those dummy LLCs to pay off the private lenders of his fake crypto startup. He is entirely insolvent, Chloe. He has a negative net worth of nearly $500,000. I scanned the meticulously organized documents, the sheer magnitude of his financial crime settling heavily over me. Tyler was not merely a parasitic lazy son waiting for a handout. He was an active corporate criminal. He had orchestrated a domestic Ponzi scheme, maliciously leveraging the flawless credit score of his own wife to maintain his pathetic country club facade. He had taken out predatory title loans against both of their luxury vehicles, meaning they did not even own the cars sitting in their driveway. You documented everything perfectly, I said, closing the heavy folder and meeting her eyes with fierce validation. This is more than enough to secure sole physical custody of Leo and completely obliterate him in divorce court. You will not pay a single cent of this accumulated debt. We will make sure the presiding judge sees exactly where every stolen dollar went. Maya took a slow, deliberate sip of her black coffee. Her hands were perfectly steady now. The frantic tears from last night were entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. He did it all for them, she said, her tone laced with absolute, unfiltered disgust. He financially ruined his own son to buy the continuous approval of Richard and Barbara. He bought them expensive dinners, paid their exorbitant country club dues, and covered their massive mortgage, all while pretending he was a self-made tech billionaire. And the worst part is your parents absolutely loved it. They encouraged the delusion. I leaned back against the leather booth, letting out a sharp breath. They always needed a golden boy. They needed someone to validate their grandiose delusions of wealth and status. They hated me, Chloe Maya stated, her gaze locking onto mine with a piercing, undeniable intensity. They always have. From the very first day Tyler brought me to your childhood home, I could see the immediate, visceral disdain in the eyes of your mother. I did not fit their archaic suburban fantasy. I am a highly educated, self-made African-American woman who earns a massive corporate salary. I did not need their family money, I did not need their social approval, and I certainly did not worship their son. My mere existence completely shattered their fragile narcissistic egos. They wanted a submissive, silent daughter-in-law who would dutifully applaud the mediocre achievements of Tyler. My genuine success deeply intimidated them, so they actively alienated me. They pushed me to the margins of every holiday dinner and family gathering. "You are entirely right," I replied, my voice hard with absolute certainty. "My parents are terrified of anyone they cannot control or manipulate. They preferred the fake, crumbling wealth of Tyler because it allowed them to maintain their superiority complex. Your authentic accomplishments highlighted their own massive failures." Maya reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a sleek, heavy, embossed envelope, and slid it across the table to sit beside the audit folder. "I intercepted this from the mail this morning before I packed my bags and left the house," she explained. "You need to see this level of delusion." I picked up the thick ivory paper and slid out the invitation inside. The gold foil lettering gleamed in the dim light of the cafe. It was a formal invitation hosted by Richard and Barbara Wilson, cordially inviting the recipient to an exclusive estate planning gala at their country club this coming Saturday. The invitation proudly proclaimed that the evening would feature a grand public announcement regarding the future legacy of the Wilson family estate. I stared at the gold lettering, a harsh, genuine laugh escaping my lips. The absolute absurdity is staggering. They are throwing a massive catered party to show off their supposed wealth and publicly name Tyler as the sole heir to the estate. They have absolutely no clue. Maya said, a ruthless, vindictive smile finally breaking through her stoic expression. Your parents honestly think they are passing down a kingdom to a visionary tech billionaire. They have no idea the estate is actively in foreclosure, and they have no idea their golden boy is completely bankrupt and about to be indicted for identity theft by his own wife. "We form our alliance right here," I said, leaning forward and firmly tapping the gold-embossed invitation. "You secure the absolute best forensic divorce attorney in the city. I will handle all the retainer costs. You take Leo, you take the house, and you serve Tyler with divorce papers and a criminal fraud complaint the exact moment he steps into that country club on Saturday. Let him be publicly exposed in front of the very people he destroyed his family to impress. We will take them all down together." Maya nodded firmly, extending her hand across the wooden table. We shook on it, an ironclad pact forged in mutual betrayal and a shared demand for absolute justice. The golden boy and his enabling parents were about to face a catastrophic reckoning, and we were going to hand-deliver it. We spent another hour finalizing our legal strategies before parting ways. Maya headed to the downtown offices of a top-tier family law firm, and I headed back to my high-rise penthouse to prepare for the inevitable fallout. I felt an incredible surge of empowerment as I drove through the city streets. The toxic hold my family had over my life was rapidly disintegrating, and I was finally in complete control of my future. I parked my vehicle in my designated underground spot and rode the private executive elevator up to my floor. The metal doors slid open with a soft melodic chime, revealing the quiet plush corridor leading to my residence. I walked toward my front door, already mentally drafting an email to my wealth manager to secure the legal funds for Maya. As I approached the threshold, my confident footsteps slowed to a sudden abrupt halt. Taped directly to the center of my heavy oak door was a thick, bright yellow envelope. The stark, aggressive color was instantly alarming against the dark wood of my entryway. I reached out and pulled it free, tearing the adhesive strip with a loud rip. The front of the envelope was stamped with bold black letters. It was a formal legal summons issued directly to me by an aggressive litigation lawyer named Marcus. I peeled the heavy yellow paper, opened my eyes, scanning the dense, threatening legal jargon printed on the crisp white pages inside. The document was an absolute masterpiece of intimidation, demanding my immediate presence at a mandatory settlement meeting at the residential estate of my parents the following evening. Failure to appear, the letter warned in bold typography, would result in immediate severe litigation. I stood in my quiet, luxurious foyer and let out a sharp, genuine laugh. They were completely out of money. Tyler was entirely bankrupt, and their grand strategy was to hire a predatory attorney to bully me back into submission. I could have easily handed the ridiculous summons over to my corporate legal team and ignored it completely. But the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the demand sparked a cold fire in my chest. I wanted to look them in the eye. I wanted to watch them play their pathetic, desperate hand. The next evening, I parked my sleek sedan at the end of the long circular driveway of my childhood home. The grand suburban estate looked exactly the same on the outside, a towering monument to suburban success with manicured hedges and a pristine brick facade. But walking up the stone path, I knew the absolute rot hiding behind those expensive heavy oak doors. I did not bother knocking. I turned the brass handle and stepped directly into the cavernous foyer. The atmosphere inside the formal living room was thick with manufactured tension. They had arranged themselves like a tribunal awaiting a guilty prisoner. My father Richard sat rigidly in his leather wingback chair, his face a mask of stern, uncompromising authority. My mother Barbara was perched on the edge of the velvet sofa, clutching a lace handkerchief with white-knuckled intensity. Tyler stood near the stone fireplace, leaning against the mantel, in an aggressive stance, his arms crossed tight over his chest. He wore a smug, venomous smirk, desperately trying to mask the absolute financial ruin Maya and I knew he was hiding. And sitting at the center of the glass coffee table, completely taking over the space with his spread-out files and leather briefcase, was Marcus. The lawyer was a walking caricature of sleazy, predatory litigation. He wore a suit that was too tight, a smile that was too bright, and cologne that immediately overpowered the room. He looked up as I entered, his eyes scanning me with blatant, calculated condescension. "Chloe," my father said, his voice dropping into that familiar, heavy tone of extreme disappointment. "Sit down. We are going to resolve this unacceptable rebellion right now." I did not sit. I remained standing just inside the archway of the living room, my posture relaxed but completely unyielding. "I prefer to stand," I replied, my voice cool and entirely detached. "State your business, Richard. I have actual work to do tonight." Barbara let out a dramatic, breathy gasp, pressing the lace handkerchief directly against her mouth. "How can you speak to your father that way?" she whimpered, her eyes darting toward the lawyer to ensure he was witnessing my supposed cruelty. Marcus held up a hand, flashing a brilliant, completely fake smile. "Let us keep the emotions out of this, Mrs. Wilson." He stood up, buttoning his tight suit jacket, and picked up a single thick document from the table. He walked slowly toward me, stopping just outside my personal space, attempting to use his physical height to intimidate me. "Ms. Wilson, my name is Marcus. I represent your parents and their estate. We are here today because your recent financial abandonment of this family constitutes a severe breach of legal obligation." He thrust the thick document directly toward my chest. I did not reach out to take it. I simply let it hang in the air between us. When I refused to grasp it, Marcus frowned awkwardly, lowering his arm and stepping back. "What you are refusing to look at is a legally binding family support agreement," Marcus stated, his voice rising in an aggressive, theatrical cadence designed to echo through the large room. "This contract stipulates that in exchange for the room board and premium lifestyle provided to you during your teenage years and early adulthood, you agreed to assume the financial liabilities of this estate. It is a lifelong commitment of filial support." I stared at him, genuinely fascinated by the sheer magnitude of their delusion. A family support agreement. They had actually paid a lawyer to draft a retroactive contract demanding payment for raising their own child. "I never signed any such document," I said, my voice dangerously soft. Tyler scoffed loudly from the fireplace. "Yes, you did, you liar. You signed it the day you turned 18. We all witnessed it." Marcus smoothly pulled a second sheet of paper from his briefcase. "We have your signature right here on the final page, Ms. Wilson. Whether you conveniently forgot or are choosing to deny it, the ink is dry. If you do not immediately resume the mortgage payments and reimburse the estate for the late fees and the emotional distress you have caused, I am prepared to initiate severe legal action by tomorrow morning." He began pacing the floor, his voice growing louder and more threatening with every step. "I will sue you for gross breach of contract. I will petition the court for aggressive wage garnishment directly through your corporate employer. I will file a devastating public lawsuit for elder abuse detailing how you maliciously attempted to render your senior parents homeless. I will absolutely drag your professional name through the mud, Ms. Wilson. Your high-level corporate executives will not look kindly upon a director who abuses her own elderly family. You will lose your job, your assets, and your reputation. Barbara chose that exact moment to escalate her performance. She let out a loud, wretched sob, burying her face in her hands. "You are killing him, Chloe," she wailed, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at my silent father. "You are literally killing your father with this stress. His heart cannot take this betrayal. We gave you everything. We fed you, we housed you, we put up with your difficult personality, and this is how you repay our love. You are a monster." Before Marcus could resume his pathetic extortion speech, the heavy oak front door clicked open. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed across the marble foyer. The imposing archway of the formal living room framed the arrival of my sister-in-law. Maya stepped into the room wearing a sharp-tailored charcoal pantsuit. Her presence commanded an immediate breathless silence, completely altering the toxic gravity of the room. Tyler immediately brightened, his chest puffed out, fueled by the desperate, pathetic delusion that his highly successful wife had arrived to rescue his crumbling ego. He genuinely believed she was there to stand by her man, to leverage her immense corporate weight against my rebellion and bolster his fake billionaire facade. "Maya, baby, you are just in time," Tyler announced, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. He took a step toward her, extending his hand as if to draw her into their toxic tribunal. "Tell my ungrateful sister how real families operate. Tell her how we handle our financial obligations. We are just finalizing a binding legal agreement that proves Chloe owes this estate every single cent she has been holding back." Maya did not take his hand. She did not even look at him. Her eyes were completely void of warmth, scanning the room with the clinical detachment of a forensic specialist arriving at an active crime scene. She walked right past her husband, leaving his hand hovering awkwardly in the air, and moved directly toward the glass coffee table. She stopped beside Marcus, who was visibly sweating, now his eyes darting around the room. Maya casually reached down and picked up the so-called family support agreement that Marcus had just attempted to use to extort me. She held the thick paper up to the light, her eyes narrowing as she activated a decade of top-tier auditing expertise. Tyler smiled smugly, waiting for her to validate the forgery and put me in my place. Instead, Maya let out a dry, humorless laugh that cut through the room like a whip. "Tyler, if you are going to commit a federal crime, you really need to put more effort into the execution," Maya stated, her voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. "This contract is dated exactly 10 years ago." She dropped the document back onto the glass table with a sharp, echoing slap. "The entire document is typed in the Calibri font family. While Calibri existed, that specific font kerning and spacing metric was not set as standard in that word processor 10 years ago. You did not even bother to match the typographical timeline to your fake date." My parents exchanged panicked, confused glances. Marcus visibly shrank back into the sofa cushions, silently cursing his clients for handing him a fabricated, easily disproved document. But Maya was not finished. She leaned over the table and pointed directly at the final page. "Furthermore, this signature bears zero resemblance to the actual handwriting of Chloe." Maya continued, her tone merciless. "The pen pressure is completely wrong, the slant is entirely forced, and the ink shows zero signs of a 10-year aging process. It was printed and signed within the last 48 hours. You forged a binding legal contract to extort your own sister because you are entirely bankrupt, drowning in hidden debt, and desperate for cash." The living room erupted into sheer chaos. Richard gripped the padded arms of his chair, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple as the reality of his golden boy committing outright forgery set in. Tyler stumbled backward, stammering incoherently, his fake billionaire persona entirely shattered by the brilliant, calculating woman he thought he could effortlessly control. Marcus, sensing his own legal license was about to go up in flames, practically dove across the coffee table. He frantically began shoving his loose papers into his leather briefcase, his previous arrogant swagger entirely replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. I was not aware this document was fraudulent, Marcus stammered rapidly, backing toward the foyer. I was retained under false pretenses. As of this exact second, I no longer represent the Wilson family. Do not contact my office. The slimy lawyer turned and fled, the front door slamming shut behind his rapid retreat. With their legal intimidation tactic completely destroyed and their golden boy exposed as a penniless fraud, Barbara completely lost her mind. The fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a vicious, snarling rage. She leaped up from the velvet sofa, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at Maya. "How dare you walk into my house and accuse my son of a crime?" Barbara shrieked, all pretense of suburban elegance dissolving into ugly, unfiltered malice. "You are nothing but an ungrateful outsider," Barbara continued, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "We welcomed you into this prestigious family. We gave you our name. You should be down on your knees thanking us for elevating your status. Instead, you come in here and attack your own husband to side with this jealous, bitter spinster. You do not belong here. You never belonged in our family." Maya did not flinch. She stood perfectly still, absorbing the vicious, pathetic insult with absolute, unshakable dignity. She slowly picked up her designer handbag, adjusted her tailored jacket, and looked my mother dead in the eye with a gaze so cold it could freeze the sun. "My place isn't in your family," Barbara Maya coldly responded. "My place is filing a federal fraud report." The silence that followed her statement was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that occurs a split second before a bomb detonates. Barbara stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, entirely incapable of processing the magnitude of the threat. Richard gripped the edges of his chair, his knuckles turning stark white as his chest heaved with suppressed, impotent rage. Then the entire family collectively turned their hostility directly onto Maya. "Are you out of your mind?" Tyler yelled, stepping aggressively toward his wife. He was panicking now, his face flushing a mottled, ugly crimson. His carefully constructed facade of the wealthy and controlled patriarch was disintegrating in real time. He pointed a shaking finger at her face, trying to muster the authority he completely lacked. "You are having an emotional breakdown. You do not know what you are talking about. Turn around, get back in your car, go home and shut your mouth. You are embarrassing me in front of my family." Maya did not retreat a single inch. She looked at the trembling, pathetic man she had married, her eyes scanning him from head to toe with a level of revulsion so pure it practically lowered the temperature of the room. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice to match his hysterical shouting. Instead, she slowly reached for her left hand. With deliberate, excruciatingly slow precision, Maya grasped her heavy diamond engagement ring and the matching platinum wedding band. She pulled them over her knuckle and held them suspended in the air for a fraction of a second. Then she opened her hand. The heavy metal hit the glass coffee table with a sharp, resounding crack that made Barbara physically flinch. The ring spun momentarily before settling flat against the forged documents Marcus had left behind. "I do not have a home with you anymore, Tyler," Maya said, her voice eerily calm, ringing out with the finality of a judge delivering a life sentence. "I filed the official divorce papers at 8 a.m. this morning. My legal team spent the entire afternoon securing an emergency immediate freeze on all our remaining joint assets, including the medical fund you attempted to drain and the fraudulent lines of credit you opened using my digital signature. You are completely locked out. Your debit cards are dead. Your access to the investment accounts is gone. You do not have a single dime to your name." Tyler staggered backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest. All the color instantly vanished from his face, leaving him a sickening, pasty white. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with devastating force. He was trapped. He could no longer siphon money from his successful wife to fund his ridiculous country club dues or pay off his shady dummy corporations. The domestic Ponzi scheme he had been running to keep up appearances for his enabling parents was officially dead. "You cannot do this," Tyler stammered, his voice breaking into a high, panicked whine that completely destroyed whatever masculine dignity he had left. "Maya, baby, please. We can talk about this. I just needed some short-term capital. I was going to pay it all back. You are going to pay it back to a federal judge, Maya replied, turning her back on him completely. She walked over to stand directly beside me, presenting a unified, impenetrable front against the toxic delusion of the Wilson family. Richard leaped up from his wingback chair, his face contorted with unchecked fury. He realized his golden boy was entirely ruined. He realized there was no hidden tech fortune, no grand inheritance, and no easy way out of the massive debt suffocating the estate. Unable to process the failure of his son, he violently redirected his wrath toward the only scapegoat he had ever known. He turned his blazing eyes on me, spittle flying from his lips as he screamed. You did this. You ruined this family, Chloe. You poisoned her mind against your brother. You brought this arrogant woman into our lives, and you conspired to destroy us because you have always been consumed by petty childish jealousy. You are a spiteful, vindictive failure who refuses to support her own blood. I stared at the man who had spent 3 decades minimizing my existence, and I let out a loud, genuine laugh. It echoed off the high ceilings, bright and completely free of the fear that used to chain me to this house. Marcus was still standing frozen by the heavy oak front door, his hand resting on the brass knob, completely paralyzed by the unfolding catastrophe. He had clearly hoped to slip out quietly before his involvement in this criminal conspiracy could be fully documented, but he was trapped by the sheer spectacle of the collapse. I turned my gaze to the terrified attorney. Go ahead and sue me, Marcus, I challenged, my voice dripping with absolute joyful defiance. File the injunction, garnish my wages. Please, I am begging you to initiate a lawsuit. I would absolutely love to see this amateur pathetic forgery presented as evidence in a federal courtroom. I want to see you try to explain to a judge why you attempted to extort a corporate director using a document printed in the wrong font and signed with wet ink on a 10-year-old date. Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He did not say a single word. He just wrenched the door open and bolted into the night, abandoning his clients to their inevitable ruin. We do not need him, Richard roared, trying to reclaim control of the room as the lawyer fled. He began pacing the expensive Persian rug, his chest puffing out with grandiose, unfiltered arrogance. We do not need your money, Chloe, and we certainly do not need your treacherous wife, Tyler. You think you have backed us into a corner? You think you have defeated the Wilson family? You are completely delusional. Richard stopped pacing and slammed his fist down onto the mantel of the stone fireplace, his eyes wild with desperate, manic confidence. Fine, he declared, his voice booming with absolute arrogance. I will just sell this house. This estate is in a prime, highly sought-after neighborhood. It is easily worth $1.5 million on the current market. I will list it tomorrow. I will pay off the remaining mortgage, completely sever all ties with you, Chloe, and give the rest of the massive profit directly to Tyler to restart his business. We will rebuild our empire without you. I did not offer a single word of rebuttal. I simply turned on my heel and walked out the front door, leaving them drowning in their spectacular delusion. The heavy oak door shut behind me with a satisfying thud, sealing them inside their crumbling fortress of lies. True to his arrogant word, Richard wasted absolutely no time. By the very next afternoon, a massive glossy real estate sign was hammered into the manicured front lawn of the estate. It did not belong to a standard neighborhood broker. They had hired Evelyn Vance, the most notoriously expensive elite luxury realtor in the city. Evelyn was known for selling multi-million-dollar properties to foreign investors and tech executives, taking an exorbitant commission in exchange for aggressive, high-profile marketing campaigns. Hiring her was Richard signaling to the entire world that his property was a crown jewel. Over the next few days, I monitored their frantic, delusional activity through the neighborhood grapevine and social media. They were entirely bankrupt, yet they somehow managed to secure another line of credit to fund a frantic cosmetic staging of the house. Landscapers arrived to lay fresh mulch. Professional cleaners scrubbed the windows. They were desperately trying to mask the financial rot with the smell of fresh paint and imported flowers. But a quiet, discreet sale was never going to be enough for my parents. They possessed a pathological need for public validation. They needed to control the narrative. They could not simply sell the house and downsize. They had to spin this catastrophic financial retreat as a brilliant, calculated business maneuver orchestrated by their visionary son. To cement this massive lie, Barbara and Richard announced a lavish pre-sale celebration. It was an event specifically designed to showcase the estate to their wealthy friends, the country club elite, and our extended family before it officially hit the market. It was a masterclass in narcissistic performance art. They hired a premium catering company, an acoustic string quartet, and a valet service, almost certainly paying for it all, with Tyler desperately shuffling funds from his last remaining hidden credit cards. On the evening of the grand celebration, I did not attend. I had not been invited, and even if I had, I would not have set foot in that house. Instead, I sat comfortably on the plush velvet sofa in my high-rise penthouse, wearing a silk robe and pouring myself a generous glass of vintage Cabernet. I opened my tablet and pulled up social media. I did not have to search hard. Barbara was highly predictable. Right on cue, a notification popped up indicating that Barbara Wilson had gone live. I tapped the screen and the video feed filled my display. The camera shook slightly as Barbara held her smartphone high, panning across the crowded, formal living room. The space was packed with people wearing expensive cocktail attire, sipping champagne and admiring the staged furniture. The string quartet played softly in the background. Barbara turned the camera to frame her own face. She was wearing a new glittering designer gown, her hair professionally styled, her lips painted a severe shade of crimson. Her eyes were bright with a manic, triumphant energy. "Hello, everyone!" Barbara cooed into the microphone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "As you can see, we are having the most fabulous evening celebrating the upcoming listing of our beautiful estate. Richard and I have simply outgrown this massive space, and our brilliant son Tyler advised us that the current luxury market is absolutely perfect for sellers." She walked through the crowd, ensuring the camera captured the faces of the wealthiest attendees. Tyler stepped into the frame for a brief moment, holding a crystal glass and wearing a tailored suit, playing the part of the successful heir apparent to absolute perfection. He offered a confident, relaxed wave to the camera before stepping away to schmooze with a local politician. "It is just time for a new chapter." Barbara continued walking toward the grand staircase to showcase the soaring ceiling of the foyer. "Evelyn Vance officially appraised the estate this morning, and we are listing it for a spectacular $1.5 million. The equity we have built in this home is simply staggering. We are going to make a massive profit, and Richard and I have decided to invest the vast majority of those proceeds directly into Tyler and his expanding business ventures. He is the future of the Wilson family legacy." Then Barbara stopped walking. She moved away from the noisy crowd, stepping into the quiet hallway leading to the formal dining room. She pulled the phone closer to her face, her artificial smile dropping, replaced by a look of sheer venomous spite. She knew exactly who was watching this broadcast. And to those who turned their backs on this family, Barbara hissed, her voice dropping into a vicious, targeted whisper. "To a certain ungrateful daughter who thought she could manipulate and destroy us. I want you to look very closely at this house. I want you to look at the success of your brother. We are walking away from this property with over $1 million in pure cash, and you will not see a single solitary cent of it. You are entirely cut off, Chloe. We are building a kingdom, and you are officially locked outside the gates." She flashed one final triumphant sneer at the camera before ending the live stream. The screen on my tablet faded to black. I sat in the quiet luxury of my penthouse, swirling the dark red wine in my glass. I took a slow, deep sip, savoring the rich, complex flavor. I did not feel angry. I did not feel hurt. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of amusement. Their delusion was so absolute, so entirely disconnected from reality, that it bordered on clinical insanity. They were throwing a catered gala to celebrate $1 million profit that did not exist. They were publicly bragging about equity that had been secretly drained years ago. Maya had already shown me the forensic audit. There was no $1.5 million windfall waiting for Richard and Barbara. The house was leveraged to the absolute hilt. Tyler had secretly taken out multiple predatory loans against the property using fraudulent signatures. The estate was completely underwater, drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of negative equity. The bank was not going to hand them a massive check. The bank was preparing to seize the property entirely. I set my wine glass down on the marble coaster and leaned back against the cushions. They had invited all of their wealthiest friends. They had broadcast their supposed victory to the entire world. They had proudly tied their entire social standing and financial future to the sale of a house they no longer truly owned. The trap was fully set. The guests were all in attendance. The champagne was flowing. I picked up my tablet again, keeping the screen active, completely relaxed. I knew the catastrophic truth, and I knew that the ticking time bomb buried under their grand estate was about to reach zero. The morning after the grand pre-sale celebration, the sprawling Wilson estate was a chaotic, humiliating mess of half-empty champagne flutes, discarded cocktail napkins, and the lingering stale scent of expensive catering. Richard sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table, sipping his black coffee with the smug, satisfied aura of a victorious king surveying his conquered lands. He was already mentally spending the massive profits from the impending sale. He had spent the entire evening receiving the jealous, fawning admiration of his wealthy peers, and his fragile ego was thoroughly dangerously inflated. Tyler sat directly across from him, severely hungover, but visibly relieved, nursing a glass of ice water. Tyler genuinely believed his catastrophic financial sins were about to be washed away by the absolute devotion and supposed immense wealth of his parents. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the heavy, self-congratulatory silence of the dining room was shattered by the sharp ringing of the house phone. Richard glanced at the caller ID. It was Evelyn Vance. He smiled a wide, predatory grin, fully expecting a groveling, breathless update about multiple cash offers and eager foreign investors fighting over the property. He answered the call and immediately pressed the speakerphone button, wanting Tyler to hear every glorious detail of their imminent financial salvation. "Good morning, Evelyn," Richard greeted, his voice practically dripping with unwarranted arrogance. "Tell me you already have buyers lining up with premium offers. We are ready to move fast. We want this closed immediately." There was a long, deeply uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. When Evelyn finally spoke, her polished elite realtor persona had completely vanished. Her voice was strained, unnaturally high-pitched, and laced with absolute, unadulterated panic. "Richard, we have a massive, catastrophic problem," Evelyn stated, her words rushing out in a frantic, breathless blur. "I have spent the last 3 hours pulling the county records and communicating directly with the title office to prep your MLS listing. Sir, I cannot legally list this property. I cannot put my agency name anywhere near this estate." Richard frowned, his smug smile instantly collapsing into a hard scowl. He shot a confused, irritated glance at Tyler. "What are you talking about? Did the city zone the back property line incorrectly? I told you to ignore the minor permit issues with the pool house. We can settle those after the sale." "This has absolutely nothing to do with permits or zoning," Evelyn countered, her voice dropping into a harsh, serious tone that demanded immediate attention. "Richard, your name is not on the deed to this house. You do not hold the title. You do not have the legal right to sell this property because you do not own it." The dining room descended into a suffocating, dead silence. Tyler slowly lowered his water glass, his hands beginning to tremble as his eyes widened in sudden, gripping terror. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Richard roared, his voice echoing violently off the vaulted ceilings. He stood up so fast, his heavy oak chair scraped harshly against the polished hardwood floor. "I bought this property 30 years ago. I built this estate. I have paid the property taxes. I hold the original mortgage documents in my secure safe. You are a highly paid elite professional, Evelyn. Do your job correctly and fix whatever pathetic clerical error you are looking at immediately." "It is not a clerical error," Evelyn fired back, her professional courtesy entirely replaced by the cold, undeniable facts of public record. "The title search is absolutely ironclad. The county records show that this exact property was officially foreclosed on exactly 10 years ago." Richard froze. The blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pallid gray. 10 years ago, the exact timeline of the massive financial crisis he had secretly hidden from his country club friends. The exact same crisis where he had maliciously forced me to assume the financial burdens of the family under the guise of teaching me responsibility. That is impossible! Richard stammered, his voice losing its booming authority, replaced by a thin, reedy panic. The bank worked with us. We restructured the debt. We signed new agreements. The bank did not work with you, Evelyn corrected her tone mercilessly, delivering the final devastating blow to his reality. The bank seized the asset. Public records clearly and undeniably document that the property was sent directly to a bank auction. It was purchased in full in cash by a private, limited liability company. The registered legal owner of the estate you are currently sitting in is a corporate entity called New Beginnings Holdings. They hold the exclusive unencumbered deed. You are nothing more than a squatter in a house owned by a private corporation. Evelyn did not wait for his response. She abruptly ended the call, the loud, monotonous dial tone blaring through the speakerphone, signaling the absolute destruction of their grand, decades-long illusion. Tyler leaped out of his chair, his hands gripping his hair in a display of absolute, unhinged panic. What does she mean, a corporate entity? Tyler screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. What does she mean the house was foreclosed 10 years ago? You told me the estate was clear. You told me we were making $1.5 million today. You promised me that cash to save my business and stop my divorce. Shut up! Richard bellowed, his face contorting with a terrifying mix of profound humiliation and explosive rage. He grabbed his smartphone from the table, his fingers trembling violently as he scrolled through his contacts. He completely ignored the stark reality that his high-priced attorney Marcus had fled their home in sheer terror just 2 nights prior. His monumental ego simply would not allow him to process defeat. This is a mistake. This is a malicious, targeted criminal attack, Richard muttered frantically, pacing the length of the dining room like a caged beast. Someone has stolen my property. Someone has illegally transferred the deed to a shell company. I am going to destroy them. I am going to put them in federal prison for the rest of their natural lives. He found the contact and slammed his thumb against the screen, raising the phone to his ear. Marcus, answer the phone. Richard growled into the voicemail recording when the lawyer predictably ignored the incoming call. I do not care if you quit. I do not care what you think you know about Tyler and his fake contracts. I am ordering you to investigate a massive criminal real estate theft immediately. A fraudulent company called New Beginnings Holdings has illegally stolen the deed to my home. Find out exactly who owns this shell corporation and prepare to file the most aggressive, devastating lawsuit this city has ever seen. Richard slammed the phone down onto the mahogany table, breathing heavily, his eyes wild with the desperate, flailing energy of a man watching his entire universe collapse. He looked at Tyler desperately, trying to maintain his shattered patriarchal authority. We are fine. We will crush this illegal corporation. No one steals from the Wilson family. But the grand, luxurious walls of the estate suddenly felt like a closing prison. The lavish decorations, the imported rugs, and the crystal chandeliers were no longer symbols of their immense wealth. They were glaring evidence of their absolute, undeniable ruin. The ticking time bomb had finally detonated, obliterating their reality, and they were standing right at ground zero, completely unaware of who was actually holding the remote. The heavy, oppressive silence in the dining room was violently shattered by the sharp ringing of Richard's smartphone. He snatched the device from the mahogany table, his thumb stabbing the speakerphone button. He expected Evelyn Vance calling back to apologize for a simple misunderstanding. Instead, he heard the exhausted, utterly defeated voice of Marcus. Richard! Marcus began, his tone stripped entirely of its usual sleazy confidence. I just pulled the county records myself. I went straight to the municipal database. Evelyn was entirely correct. The foreclosure executed exactly 10 years ago is absolute, irrevocable, and legally binding. That is a lie, Richard roared, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. We restructured. We signed new agreements with the bank. I have the paperwork in my safe. You defaulted on the restructuring agreements, Marcus corrected him, his voice flat and merciless. You missed 3 consecutive payments 9 years and 11 months ago. The bank auctioned the property to recover their losses. It was purchased in full in cash by a private corporate entity named New Beginnings Holdings. They hold the exclusive unencumbered deed. You have zero legal claim to this estate. Tyler began pacing the dining room, his breathing shallow, his hands pulling frantically at his hair. This is a massive corporate screw-up, Tyler yelled at the phone, his voice pitching into a hysterical whine. Banks make these kinds of administrative errors all the time. They illegally foreclosed on us and sold our home to a dummy corporation. Do you know what this means, Dad? This is a massive lawsuit. We can sue the bank for tens of millions in damages. We can sue this LLC for emotional distress. Marcus, you need to find out exactly who owns New Beginnings Holdings right now. A dry, humorless laugh echoed through the speaker. You do not understand, Tyler. The paperwork is completely flawless. The transfer was executed perfectly, and as for finding out who owns the LLC, it is registered in Delaware as a blind trust. The corporate veil is entirely airtight. You are not suing anyone. In fact, if the true owners realize you are actively attempting to list their private property on the open market, they will have you immediately arrested for criminal fraud. I am officially resigning as your legal counsel effective right this second. Do not ever contact my office again. The line went dead, leaving the dial tone echoing through the cavernous room. Before Richard could erupt into another violent tirade, the heavy brass knocker on the front door pounded loudly. Barbara jumped, her manicured hand flying to her chest. "Is that Evelyn returning?" she asked, her voice trembling with a pathetic, desperate shred of hope. Maybe she found a loophole. Maybe she realizes it is a mistake. Richard stormed out of the dining room and marched across the foyer, yanking the heavy oak door open. It was not the elite luxury realtor. A man in a nondescript gray windbreaker stood on the pristine front porch holding a thick, heavy manila envelope. "Tyler Wilson?" the man asked, his eyes looking past Richard and landing directly on my brother, who had followed his father into the hallway. Tyler stepped forward, his face pale and slick with a cold, terrified sweat. "Yes, I am Tyler." The man thrust the heavy envelope directly into Tyler's chest, forcing him to grab it. "You have been served," the man stated flatly, turning on his heel and walking briskly down the manicured driveway without a single backward glance. Tyler fumbled with the envelope, his hands shaking so violently that he nearly dropped it onto the imported marble tiles. He ripped the heavy seal open and pulled out a massive, intimidating stack of legal documents. The bold black header on the very first page was unmistakable. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Maya had not hesitated for a single second. She had struck with lethal, calculated precision. Barbara let out a sharp, dramatic gasp, rushing forward to peer over her son's trembling shoulder. "Divorce papers!" Barbara cried, her voice reaching a hysterical, grating pitch. "She is actually leaving you. After everything this family has done for her, she is abandoning her husband when he needs her the most." Tyler did not answer his mother. He was staring at the second page of the filing, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated horror. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Richard noticed his son's paralyzing fear. He snatched the thick stack of papers directly out of Tyler's hands, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. As Richard read, the last remaining shreds of his patriarchal dominance drained out of his body. The documents were not just standard boilerplate divorce filings. They contained a comprehensive, devastating forensic audit of Tyler's entire pathetic existence attached as exhibits for the court. "What is this?" Richard demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying whisper. "Tyler, what exactly are these numbers?" The legal papers explicitly listed every single hidden debt Tyler had accumulated over the past decade. Maya's legal team had meticulously documented his complete financial ruin. The papers detailed his maxed-out high-interest credit cards, his repeatedly defaulted business loans, and the predatory secondary lines of credit he had opened using forged digital signatures. The documentation outlined line by line exactly how Tyler had actively attempted to siphon hundreds of thousands of dollars from Maya's personal medical fund to pay off his massive gambling losses and continuously failing dummy corporations. Worse still, the final page explicitly stated that Maya was not merely seeking a divorce. She was actively pursuing aggressive criminal fraud and embezzlement charges against him through federal channels. "You are completely bankrupt," Richard stated, staring at his golden boy with a look of pure, unfiltered disgust. "You do not have a successful business. You do not have a hidden tech fortune. You are millions of dollars in debt and you are a criminal." Tyler backed away, his legs hitting the edge of the foyer's console table. "Dad, I can explain everything. It was just a bad quarter. The market shifted. I just need a temporary cash injection to turn the business around. Once we sell this house, I can pay Maya back before the judge even sees the fraud charges. We can easily fix this. We just need the cash from the sale." The sheer blinding absurdity of Tyler's statement hung in the dead air of the grand foyer. The delusion was finally irreparably shattered. Barbara sank heavily onto the bottom step of the grand staircase, her legs simply giving out beneath her. She buried her face in her trembling hands as a loud, wretched sob tore from her throat. There was no house to sell. The estate they had proudly shown off to their elite friends just hours ago belonged to a faceless, nameless corporation. They were essentially squatters, waiting for an inevitable eviction notice. And the brilliant, successful son they had worshipped, funded, and protected for decades was entirely exposed as a penniless, fraudulent failure facing imminent federal prison time. Richard let the thick stack of divorce papers slip from his numb fingers. The documents scattered across the expensive marble floor, the crisp white pages blanketing the ground like debris falling from a catastrophic explosion. The mighty, untouchable Wilson Empire had not just crumbled. They finally realized it had never truly existed at all. The pristine, climate-controlled silence of my executive office was a sharp contrast to the absolute wreckage I knew my family was currently experiencing. I sat behind my polished mahogany desk, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline below. I was reviewing the quarterly logistics reports for my division, completely at peace when the sleek digital intercom on my desk chimed with a polite, insistent tone. "Ms. Wilson." The voice of the head of corporate security filtered through the speaker, sounding exceptionally strained. "I apologize for the interruption. We have a situation in the main lobby. A Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, along with a younger gentleman, are currently demanding immediate access to your office. They are becoming highly agitated and are threatening to call the police if we do not let them up." I smiled, closing my laptop with a soft click. The sheer predictability of their behavior was almost comforting. They had lost their house. Tyler had been entirely exposed as a fraudulent failure, and their very first instinct was to storm my workplace to demand salvation. "Do not call the police, David," I replied, my voice perfectly level and calm. "Escort them up to the 65th floor, put them in the main executive conference room, and offer them some water. I will be right there." I stood up, smoothed the skirt of my tailored suit, and walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the executive conference room. The space was intimidating by design, featuring a massive slab of polished marble for a table, leather ergonomic chairs, and panoramic views of the financial district. Maya was already sitting at the far end of the marble table. She wore a sharp charcoal gray blazer, her posture rigidly professional, a stack of heavily redacted financial files resting squarely in front of her. She was here acting in her official capacity as my forensic financial witness, fully prepared to document every single desperate word they were about to say. Less than 2 minutes later, the glass doors violently swung open. Richard marched into the room, leading the charge with the aggressive, frantic energy of a dictator whose empire was actively burning to the ground. His suit was severely wrinkled, his tie hung loose around his neck, and his face was a terrifying shade of gray. Barbara trailed close behind him, clutching her designer handbag against her chest like a protective shield. Her eyes were bloodshot, completely stripped of their usual arrogant sparkle, and her expensive makeup was visibly smeared. Tyler brought up the rear, and he looked absolutely dead on his feet. The swaggering, arrogant billionaire persona was entirely gone. He was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he refused to make eye contact with anyone. When he walked in and saw Maya sitting calmly at the table, he physically flinched, taking a rapid step backward until his shoulders hit the glass door. Maya did not blink. She simply stared at him with the cold, clinical detachment of a predator watching a trapped mouse. "Chloe, we have a massive, unprecedented crisis," Richard barked, completely ignoring Maya and marching directly toward my side of the table. He slammed his palms flat against the marble, trying to use his physical size to command the room. I did not stand up. I simply leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. "State your business, Richard. You are currently trespassing in a secured corporate facility. This is not the time for your rebellious attitude," Richard yelled, his voice echoing loudly in the sleek, quiet room. "We are the victims of a highly sophisticated malicious cybercrime. Someone has illegally infiltrated the county database and stolen the deed to our estate. They have fabricated a fraudulent foreclosure record and transferred our property to a shell company. We have been robbed of our $1.5 million asset." I looked at him, genuinely marveling at the strength of his denial. A cybercrime. He was actually trying to convince himself that international hackers had stolen his suburban mortgage. "It is a corporate entity," Tyler stammered from the doorway, his voice cracking with desperate, high-pitched panic. "It is called New Beginnings Holdings. It is a blind trust registered in Delaware. We cannot see who the board members are. We cannot see who authorized the transfer. It is a completely airtight corporate veil." Tyler took a hesitant step forward, desperately trying to sound like a competent businessman while entirely failing to hide his sheer terror. "You run the logistics and supply chain software for this entire corporation, Chloe. You have access to top-tier corporate databases. You have connections with federal auditors. You need to log into your system right now and run a trace on New Beginnings Holdings. We need to pierce that corporate veil. We need the names of the individuals who stole our equity. I need that cash, Chloe. You do not understand what is happening to me. I have to get that money back today." Tyler shot a terrified, rapid glance at Maya, silently begging her not to mention the federal fraud charges or the divorce papers she had publicly served him less than 12 hours ago. Maya simply turned a page in her file, letting the heavy silence amplify his absolute humiliation. Barbara finally found her voice. She lunged forward, pushing past Richard and slamming her hands onto the table. Her face was twisted into a mask of ugly, venomous entitlement. "Your father and your brother are the victims of a targeted attack," Barbara shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. "You are going to sit at that computer and you are going to find out exactly who these thieves are. And then you are going to pay for it, Chloe. You have millions in stock options. You have a massive corporate salary while your own family is suffering. You are going to write a check today and hire the most expensive elite litigation shark in this entire city." Barbara leaned over the table, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "You are going to pay whatever it takes to sue this fraudulent company into oblivion. You are going to fix this, Chloe. We provided for you your entire life and now you owe us. You are going to get our house back and you are going to save your brother's business." I sat perfectly still, letting her hysterical demands ring out through the room. I looked at Richard, panting and gray-faced. I looked at Tyler, visibly vibrating with terror. And I looked at Barbara, completely blinded by her own staggering entitlement. They had stormed into my professional sanctuary, bankrupt, desperate, and entirely ruined, and they were still trying to treat me like an ATM and a servant. I did not utter a single word to my mother. I simply pushed my leather chair back and stood up. The silence in the executive conference room was immediate and absolute, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels against the polished hardwood floor. I walked deliberately past Richard, who was still leaning aggressively over the table, his face twisted in an arrogant sneer. I walked past Barbara, whose finger remained pointed at the empty space where I had just been sitting. I moved directly to the sleek control panel mounted on the far wall. I tapped a sequence of commands on the glass screen. The heavy automated blackout shades seamlessly glided down over the floor to ceiling windows, shutting out the bright morning sun and plunging the room into a cool, dramatic twilight. Above us, a state-of-the-art overhead projector hummed to life, casting a massive, crisp, rectangular glow onto the blank white presentation wall at the head of the table. Tyler shifted nervously, his eyes darting between the lowering shades and the glowing screen. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. Richard let out a heavy, impatient sigh, crossing his arms and squaring his stance, completely convinced that I was finally submitting to his demands. He genuinely believed I was about to unleash my corporate resources to hunt down his imaginary cyber criminals and restore his fabricated kingdom. I walked back to my seat, opened my laptop, and synced my screen to the overhead projector. Every keystroke echoed loudly in the dim room. The massive wall screen instantly mirrored my desktop. I opened a secure encrypted browser window and navigated directly to the Delaware Division of Corporations database. I typed in the credentials required to access restricted ownership records, the exact kind of high-level corporate access Tyler had just finished begging me to use. "Here we go," Richard muttered, a fierce, vindictive grin spreading across his face. "Get ready, Tyler. We are going to take every last dime these criminals have. We will bankrupt them before the week is over. We will bury this shell company." I ignored him, my eyes locked on my monitor. The screen on the wall shifted, displaying the highly guarded official state registry and corporation documents for New Beginnings Holdings, LLC. The dense, heavily watermarked legal text filled the wall, complete with the official state seals and filing timestamps from exactly 10 years ago. I could hear Barbara stepping closer to the screen, her eyes squinting to read the complex financial terminology. Maya sat perfectly still, watching the impending devastation, with the quiet grace of someone who already knew exactly how this execution would end. I scrolled past the articles of incorporation, bypassing the standard boilerplate language regarding blind trusts, corporate shielding, and liability protections. I scrolled past the operational bylaws and the registered agent details. The scrolling was slow, deliberate, and agonizingly drawn out. I wanted them to feel the anticipation. I wanted them to practically taste the impending victory they thought they were about to achieve. I wanted them suspended at the very peak of their arrogance before I severed the cable. "Wait," Tyler said, his voice trembling as he leaned closer to the projection, his eyes frantically scanning the dense paragraphs. "Is this the original deed transfer? Does it list the holding company directors who signed off on the purchase?" I reached the final section of the PDF, the authorization and equity distribution page. I moved the cursor to the scroll bar and gave it one final decisive pull downward. The screen locked onto the final signature page. The text was magnified, stark and undeniable, in bold black lettering against the bright white background. The silence that descended upon the room was not just quiet, it was a suffocating atmospheric vacuum. It was the exact sound of reality crashing into delusion at terminal velocity. Listed plainly on the glowing wall under the strict legal heading of sole proprietor and 100% equity owner was a single name. My name, Chloe Wilson. The color drained from Richard's face so rapidly, it looked as though he had been physically struck by a freight train. The aggressive, dictatorial red flush vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly, chalky white pallor. His jaw went completely slack, hanging open as his eyes darted back and forth across my printed name, desperately searching for a typo, a clerical error, a hallucination. He blinked rapidly, stepping closer to the wall as if proximity would change the letters. There was no mistake. The legal documentation was flawless, legally binding, and absolute. Behind him, Tyler let out a strange, strangled gasp. His knees buckled entirely, giving out beneath his weight. He fell backward, his body crashing heavily into one of the ergonomic leather chairs. He sat there, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish, desperately trying to pull oxygen into his lungs, but his diaphragm simply refused to work. His eyes were wide with a terror so profound it bordered on madness. His hands gripped the armrests of the chair so tightly his knuckles turned entirely white. Barbara stepped back, stumbling slightly, as her designer heel caught on the edge of the carpet. She stared at the wall, her brain aggressively failing to process the information her eyes were transmitting. Her mind simply could not bridge the gap between her arrogant assumptions and the stark, undeniable proof glaring down at her. "Chloe?" Barbara stammered, her voice weak, airy, and thoroughly broken. "I do not understand. This says your name. Why does the hacker file have your name on it? Did they steal your identity too? Is that how they got the house? Why is your name on this document?" She was still grasping, still clawing desperately at the edge of the cliff, entirely unable to accept that she was already falling. I looked at my mother, then shifted my gaze to my brother, who was currently hyperventilating in a corporate desk chair, and finally settled my eyes on my father, who looked as though he were actively experiencing a massive cardiac event. I smiled. It was not a professional smile, and it was certainly not a familial one. It was the sweetest, sharpest, most dangerous smile I had ever worn in my entire life. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 10 years quietly, meticulously sharpening a blade they never even knew existed, waiting for the perfect moment to slide it between their ribs. "No one stole my identity, Barbara," I said, my voice smooth, pleasant, and utterly merciless. "And there are no hackers. There is no cybercrime. There is no massive conspiracy to defraud the Wilson family. There is only a perfectly legal, heavily vetted, ironclad real estate transaction executed a decade ago." Richard grabbed the edge of the marble table, his hands shaking violently as he struggled to remain upright. He whispered the single syllable scraping out of his throat like crushed glass. "You bought our house." "I bought a bank-seized asset at a public foreclosure auction exactly 10 years ago," I corrected him, my tone conversational and light, casually stating the facts that destroyed his entire life. "You defaulted on your loans. You squandered the family wealth trying to prop up Tyler's disastrously stupid ventures. The bank seized the property to cover your massive, embarrassing debts. They threw it on the open market, and I purchased it in full in cash. I created a blind trust to hold the deed so you could continue living in your suburban fantasy world while I held absolute leverage over your actual reality. I have paid the property taxes every single year. I own the roof over your head." Tyler clutched his chest, a pathetic whining noise escaping his lips as he rocked back and forth in the chair. "You let us think we owned it. You let me plan my business expansion around that equity. You let Mom and Dad promise me that money to save my marriage." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the marble, locking eyes with my terrified brother. "I did not let you do anything, Tyler. You fabricated an entire financial universe built on staggering entitlement and complete incompetence. You drained Maya's accounts, you forged documents, and you assumed the universe would just magically reward you for simply existing. I just stood back and watched you build your own gallows. I am the sole owner of the estate you currently sleep in. You are not receiving a dime of equity because there is absolutely no equity for you to claim. You are a guest in my property, and as of this exact moment, you have officially overstayed your welcome." The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. It was the sound of an entire fabricated reality violently shattering against a concrete wall of truth. Richard shook his head, a grotesque spasm of denial twitching across his gray, exhausted face. He looked at the massive projection on the wall, then back at me, his brain aggressively rejecting the visual evidence. "You are lying!" Richard choked out, his voice entirely devoid of its former booming authority, reduced to a desperate, raspy wheeze. "We paid that mortgage. You sent us the money every month when the business was tight. We paid the bank. We kept the house." I laughed, a harsh, echoing sound that made Barbara flinch violently in her seat. "You really have lived in a state of complete, intentional delusion for a full decade. Let us take a walk down memory lane, Richard. Let us rewind exactly 10 years to the great tech startup disaster." Tyler visibly shrank in his chair, curling into himself, as if trying to physically disappear into the expensive leather upholstery. "You remember that, do you not, Tyler?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously smooth. "Your very first monumental failure. The revolutionary logistics app that was going to change the world, but somehow just ended up incinerating every single dollar attached to it." I turned my gaze back to my parents. "And you two, in your infinite wisdom and blind worship of your golden boy, decided to save him. But you did not just use your own savings. You stole my entire college fund. Every single cent my grandfather left me for my education, you liquidated and handed directly to Tyler to cover his embarrassing incompetence." Barbara opened her mouth to protest, a weak, trembling sound escaping her throat, but I slammed my hand flat onto the marble table. The loud crack silenced her instantly. Do not even try to justify it. I commanded, my eyes locking onto hers with merciless intensity. You told me it was a temporary loan. You told me the family had to stick together. But that was not the end of it, was it, Richard? Because Tyler's app did not just fail. It spectacularly imploded. He racked up debts you could not possibly cover with my stolen tuition money. So you secretly took out a second mortgage on the estate, then a third. You drained your retirement accounts behind closed doors because you were both too terrified of losing your precious country club status to admit your son was a catastrophic financial liability. Richard was staring at the floor now, his hands gripping the edge of the marble table so hard his knuckles were stark white. He had absolutely no defense. The truth was laying bare his deepest, most closely guarded shame in front of his entire family and my forensic accountant. You went completely bankrupt, I stated, letting the words drop like lead weights into the quiet room. You defaulted on everything. The bank swooped in and executed a silent, rapid foreclosure. You were weeks away from having your designer furniture tossed onto the front lawn by the county sheriff. I stood up, walking slowly around the edge of the massive table, my heels clicking methodically against the hardwood. While you were busy coddling Tyler and aggressively ignoring my existence, I was actually working. I was building my career from the ground up, making smart, quiet investments and establishing real corporate connections. When I saw the public foreclosure notice for the estate cross my desk, I felt a moment of profound clarity. I could have let you get evicted. I could have let the entire neighborhood watch you carry cardboard boxes to a rented moving truck. I stopped directly behind Tyler's chair. He stiffened, staring straight ahead, too paralyzed by pure terror to look up at me. But I felt a momentary shred of pity. I continued, my voice dripping with cold condescension. I knew how pathetic you would all look out on the street. So I formed New Beginnings Holdings, LLC. I attended the bank auction through a proxy. I bought the estate for pennies on the dollar because nobody else wanted a bloated, outdated mansion with severe foundation issues. I paid the bank in full. I walked away with the clean, unencumbered deed. But the monthly checks? Barbara whispered, her voice cracking, as fresh, humiliating tears spilled over her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. You sent us money every month. You said you were helping us pay our mortgage so we could keep the house. Oh, Barbara. I sighed, shaking my head with exaggerated, mocking sympathy. You really do not understand basic finance, do you? I never sent you a single dime to pay your mortgage. You did not have a mortgage. The bank had already washed their hands of you. The checks I sent you were carefully calculated allowances. I was paying my own property taxes. I was paying for the upkeep of my own asset. You thought I was your grateful, subservient daughter bailing you out of a tight spot. In reality, I was just maintaining my real estate investment. I leaned down, resting my hands firmly on the back of Tyler's chair, speaking directly and clearly to my parents. You haven't owned that house for a decade. The mortgage you thought I was paying for you, I was paying my own mortgage. You were just my non-paying tenants. You were living absolutely rent-free under my roof while maintaining your pathetic illusion of wealth and superiority. Richard looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a sudden, desperate realization. If you own the house, then the $1.5 million Tyler promised us from the sale does not exist, Maya interjected smoothly, speaking for the very first time. Her voice was crisp, highly professional, and utterly merciless. As Chloe's financial witness, I can confirm that Tyler attempted to list a commercial property he had zero legal right to sell. He forged documents to secure predatory bridge loans based on imaginary equity. He has committed federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. He essentially tried to sell a house he was squatting in to cover his massive gambling debts and fund his fake companies. Tyler let out a wretched, choking sound, burying his face completely in his trembling hands. You let us treat you like garbage, Barbara sobbed, her shoulders shaking violently as her entire worldview collapsed. You let us praise Tyler for years while you owned the very roof over our heads. Why did you not just tell us? Why let us believe we were still in control? Because watching you worship a complete fraud while you lived entirely on my charity was the ultimate insurance policy, I replied coldly, walking back to my seat. You stole my college fund to save him. I bought your entire reality to save myself. You needed to believe you were superior so you would not look too closely at the paperwork. You were so blinded by your own arrogance and your absolute desperation to keep Tyler on a pedestal that you never once questioned why a bank would let you stay in a foreclosed home for 10 years. I sat back down perfectly relaxed, completely in control of the room. You came in here demanding that I use my corporate power to find a thief. You arrogantly demanded I pay for a top-tier litigation lawyer to sue the LLC. But there is no one to sue. There is no hacker. There is no grand conspiracy. There is no one to blame but yourselves. You handed your entire future to a compulsive liar and you burned your own kingdom to the ground. The words hung in the sterile, climate-controlled air of the executive conference room. Richard looked as though he had been physically gutted by an invisible blade. His jaw worked soundlessly, his mouth opening and closing as he failed to generate a single coherent syllable. Tyler remained curled in his chair, completely catatonic, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. But Barbara, ever the survivalist in her own warped suburban reality, suddenly underwent a terrifying and nauseating metamorphosis right before my eyes. The vicious, sneering mask of entitlement melted off her face in a fraction of a second. She blinked rapidly, her tear-stained eyes widening as her brain frantically recalibrated the power dynamics of the room. She processed the single detail that mattered to her survival. I owned the house. Therefore, in her deeply twisted, heavily conditioned mind, the family still owned the house. Barbara let out a wet, hysterical gasp that sounded like a cross between a laugh and a sob. She stumbled forward, her designer heels clicking erratically against the polished floor. Her arms shot out, reaching for me with a sudden, desperate display of manufactured affection that made my stomach aggressively churn. "Chloe!" Barbara cried out, her voice pitching into a sickeningly sweet, trembling octave. "Oh my God, Chloe! You brilliant, wonderful, smart girl! You saved us!" I did not move. I watched her approach with the cold, clinical fascination of a scientist observing a desperate parasite. Maya, sitting quietly at the end of the table, did not even blink, her pen hovering over her notepad as she documented every single frantic word. "You absolute genius!" Barbara babbled, tears streaming down her face as she tried to close the distance between us. "You saw what was happening 10 years ago with the bank. You stepped in and protected the family legacy. You kept the estate safe from those predators. I always knew you were smart, but this is incredible. You are the savior of this family." She lunged forward, attempting to wrap her arms around my shoulders in a crushing, theatrical embrace. I took a single sharp step backward, my expression radiating pure, unadulterated disgust. Her arms grasped nothing but empty air. She stumbled awkwardly, catching her balance on the heavy edge of the marble conference table. "Do not touch me, Barbara," I commanded, my voice dropping to a glacial, uncompromising chill that froze her in place. She stood there, her hands hovering awkwardly in the air, but her delusion was far too powerful to be shattered by a simple physical rejection. She simply clasped her hands tightly to her chest, looking at me with wide, pleading eyes that were utterly devoid of shame. "I understand you are angry about how we spoke to you earlier," Barbara said, her tone dripping with a frantic, placating sweetness. "We were just so stressed. We were terrified of losing everything. But none of that matters now. Do you not see Richard?" She spun around to face her husband, who was still staring blankly at the projected corporate documents on the wall. "The house is still in the family. Chloe has the deed. We are perfectly safe." Richard slowly turned his heavy head, a faint, pathetic glimmer of hope sparking in his dead, bloodshot eyes. He looked at me, a silent, desperate question forming on his pale lips, his arrogant posture completely broken. Barbara spun back to me, her words rushing out in a frantic, manic blur. "This is perfect, Chloe, so it is still in the family. We can still sell it and give the money to Tyler to save him. You can sign the authorization for Evelyn Vance to proceed with the MLS listing immediately. The real estate market is peaking right now. We can secure a massive cash offer by the end of the week and bail your brother out of this terrible misunderstanding." Tyler finally lifted his head from his shaking hands. His eyes were red-rimmed and terrified, but the sheer blinding panic had been temporarily replaced by the toxic, enabling lifeline his mother was currently dangling in front of him. "Yes," Tyler gasped, gripping the armrests of his chair and pulling himself upright, ignoring Maya's completely stoic presence in the room. "Chloe, you can sell the house. We can take the cash. Maya is trying to ruin me. She filed federal fraud charges. If I do not have liquid capital to cover the missing corporate funds and pay off those bridge loans by Monday, I am going to federal prison. You have to sell the house and give me the money. It is the only way to save my life." The sheer unbridled audacity of their demands echoed loudly off the glass walls of the conference room. They had literally just discovered that they were penniless squatters who had driven themselves into bankruptcy by stealing my college fund, and their immediate instinctive reaction was to demand I liquidate my own multi-million-dollar asset to cover my brother's criminal embezzlement. I looked at Tyler, his face pale and slick with a terrified sweat. I looked at Barbara, her eyes wide with desperate pleading entitlement. And I looked at Richard, the fallen patriarch, waiting silently for the daughter he despised to rescue him from his own monumental incompetence. I let out a short, sharp laugh that completely stripped the room of any remaining hope. "Are you completely deaf, or are you genuinely suffering from a psychotic break?" I asked, my voice echoing with absolute authority. I took a slow, deliberate step toward them, forcing Barbara to physically shrink back against the marble table. "Did you not hear yourselves at Thanksgiving?" I demanded, my words striking them like physical blows. "Do you not remember sitting at the head of that mahogany dining table looking down your nose at me? You poured an expensive glass of wine, cleared your throat, and proudly announced to the entire family that I was a massive disappointment." Richard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as the memory of his own hubris crashed down on him. Tyler looked away, entirely unable to meet my eyes. "You stood in front of everyone and declared that because I refused to be your silent, subservient victim, I was officially cut out of the family will." I continued, my voice rising, filling the room with the crushing weight of their own arrogance. "You maliciously disinherited me. You smugly told me that Tyler, the perfect golden boy, would receive the entire estate. You cut me out of the will for a house you did not even own." Barbara covered her mouth with a trembling hand, a fresh wave of horrified tears welling in her eyes as the inescapable reality of her situation finally breached her delusion. "You tried to weaponize an asset against me while living completely rent-free under my roof," I stated, the brutal irony of the situation hanging heavily in the air. "You arrogantly believed you were holding my future hostage when in reality you were standing on a trapdoor and I was holding the lever." I turned my attention back to Tyler, who had completely collapsed back into his chair. The brief flash of hope entirely extinguished by the cold, hard truth. "You have absolutely nothing to give him," I said, looking directly at my parents, my voice dropping to a cold, final whisper. "The Grand Wilson Empire is completely bankrupt. The bank accounts are empty. The credit lines are frozen. The house belongs exclusively to me. There is no secret trust fund. There is no miraculous bailout. The well is dry." The absolute finality of my words hung in the chilled air of the conference room like an executioner's blade. The grand illusion that had sustained the Wilson family for an entire decade was officially dead. Tyler stared at the floor, his chest heaving as if the oxygen had been violently sucked from the room. The sleek, custom-tailored suit that usually acted as his armor now hung on him like a cheap, oversized shroud. He let out a ragged, gasping breath and his legs gave way completely. He slid out of the ergonomic leather chair, his knees hitting the polished hardwood floor with a dull, heavy thud that echoed sharply off the glass walls. The undisputed golden boy of the Wilson family, the brilliant entrepreneur who could do no wrong, the son who had been elevated above me since the day we were born, was now groveling on the floor of my corporate office. "Chloe, please," Tyler begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. He crawled forward, his hands pressing flat against the cold wood. He did not look at our parents. He knew they were utterly useless to him now. He kept his bloodshot, tear-filled eyes locked entirely on me. "You do not have to give me all of it," he pleaded, the words spilling out in a frantic, desperate rush. "Just a fraction. Just 10% of the estate's value. You have millions in corporate stock, Chloe. You have this massive career. You do not even need the money from that house. I will sign whatever you want. I will sign away any future claim to anything our parents have left. Just give me 10% so I can pay off the immediate bridge loans. I stared down at him, my expression a mask of absolute unyielding stone. I did not offer a single word of comfort. You do not understand who I borrowed from. Tyler continued, his voice escalating into a hysterical, breathless sob. I forged the collateral documents. I used the house deed, the one I thought we owned, to secure millions in venture capital and private equity. The lenders are calling in the margins today. If I do not wire them liquid cash by the close of business, they are going to trigger a federal investigation. They will send me to federal prison, Chloe. I will not survive in prison. You have to save me. I am your brother. He reached out his trembling fingers, brushing the leather toe of my shoe. I immediately took a sharp step back, pulling my foot away, as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. Do not leverage biology when it is suddenly convenient for you, Tyler, I stated, my voice echoing with glacial detachment. You have not treated me like a sister since the day you stood back and let them steal my college fund. You are nothing to me but a squatter who just confessed to federal fraud in a room full of corporate witnesses. At the far end of the marble table, a chair scraped loudly against the hardwood. Maya stood up. She did not rush. She moved with the terrifying, deliberate grace of an apex predator that had finally cornered its prey. She picked up the thick, heavily redacted manila folder she had been meticulously maintaining all morning. She walked slowly around the length of the massive conference table, her heels clicking in perfect rhythmic precision. Tyler flinched at the sound. He looked up, his tear-stained face twisting in fresh panic as his soon-to-be ex-wife towered over him. Maya looked down at the man she had married, her face completely devoid of any affection, pity, or hesitation. She possessed the cold, clinical detachment of a forensic auditor observing a thoroughly ruined ledger. She raised the thick folder and dropped it directly onto the floor in front of Tyler. It landed with a heavy, definitive smack, sending a small rush of air against his face. You are too late, Tyler, Maya said, her voice ringing out crisp and crystal clear in the quiet room. Tyler stared at the folder, as if it were a live explosive. What is this? He whispered, his entire body shaking uncontrollably. That is a complete, unredacted copy of your true financial history, Maya replied, crossing her arms and looking down at him with absolute disgust. I spent the last 3 months quietly conducting a forensic audit of every single one of your shell companies, your hidden accounts, and your fraudulent loan applications. I tracked every dollar you embezzled from my personal accounts. I tracked every forged signature you used to secure funding based on a house you did not even own. Barbara let out a stifled, horrifying gasp, pressing both hands over her mouth as she watched her perfect son being systematically dismantled. Richard was entirely paralyzed, leaning heavily against the wall, completely broken by the sheer magnitude of the disgrace. You promised you would wait, Tyler sobbed, looking up at Maya with a pathetic, desperate betrayal in his eyes. You said we would sort this out privately in the divorce settlement. I lied, Maya stated flatly, not a single ounce of remorse in her tone. You spent our entire marriage lying to me, gaslighting me, and draining my assets to fund your pathetic illusion of a business empire. Did you honestly believe I would let you negotiate your way out of this? Maya stepped closer, her shadow falling over his groveling form. I did not just audit you, Tyler. I packed up every single piece of evidence, every phantom ledger, every fake collateral document, every illegal wire transfer, and I already reported your fraudulent loans to the authorities and the IRS. Tyler let out a sound that barely resembled a human voice. It was a guttural, wounded shriek of pure devastation. The SEC has the files, Maya continued, her words acting as the final nails in his coffin. The federal prosecutors have the files. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has the files. They know about the forged deed. They know about the bridge loans. They know about the money you funneled into offshore accounts. Warrants are likely being drafted as we speak. She looked down at him, her eyes burning with a fierce, vindictive triumph. You came in here begging your sister to save you from a sinking ship, but you do not realize you are already at the bottom of the ocean. You aren't getting a dime from Chloe, and you're getting absolutely nothing from me. I filed the divorce papers. I froze our remaining joint assets, and I handed you over to the federal government. You are finished. The absolute finality of Maya's words hit Tyler with the force of a physical blow. The last remaining shred of his golden boy persona instantly evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, ruined criminal. He collapsed entirely. He curled into a tight fetal position on the polished hardwood floor, burying his face in his arms. He began to sob loudly, his shoulders heaving with deep, uncontrollable, ugly cries. The sound of his weeping filled the executive conference room, echoing off the blackout shades and the sleek marble table. Barbara slowly sank into her chair, covering her face, as she wept alongside him, mourning the sudden violent death of her family's manufactured legacy. Richard stared blankly ahead, a hollow, empty shell of a man who had sacrificed his daughter, his finances, and his dignity for a son who was currently crying on the floor, waiting to be arrested. Maya turned away from Tyler in absolute disgust, walking calmly back to her seat to retrieve her purse. I stood at the head of the table, looking down at the wreckage of the Wilson family, feeling nothing but profound, absolute peace. The sound of Tyler weeping on the polished hardwood floor was the only noise left in the executive conference room. Maya had already turned on her heel and exited through the heavy glass doors, taking her forensic files and her absolute vengeance with her. I stood at the head of the marble table, looking down at the total wreckage of the Wilson family. Tyler was curled in a tight fetal position, sobbing uncontrollably, as the dark reality of his impending federal prison sentence finally crushed him. Barbara was slumped in her leather chair, her face buried deep in her hands, mourning the violent death of her manufactured legacy. Richard was staring blankly at the wall, a hollowed-out shell of a man who had sacrificed his daughter, his finances, and his dignity for a son who was currently waiting to be arrested by federal agents. I turned my attention entirely away from my brother and focused on my parents. I reached down to my leather briefcase resting on the carpet beside my chair. I snapped the brass clasps open and pulled out a single pristine manila envelope. It was crisp, unmarked, and heavy with absolute legal authority. I placed it flat on the cool marble surface and pushed it forward. It slid smoothly across the long table, the friction creating a soft, continuous hiss, until it stopped directly in front of Richard's folded, trembling hands. "Since you were so eager to pack my bags at Thanksgiving," I said, my voice slicing cleanly through the pathetic sounds of my brother's crying, "I am returning the favor." Richard blinked heavily, snapping out of his catatonic state. He stared at the envelope as if it were a highly venomous snake resting on the table. His hands shook violently as he reached forward and tore the flap open. He pulled out the thick stack of formal notarized documents. His bloodshot eyes scanned the heavy black header printed clearly at the top of the first page. Notice to quit. 30-day eviction notice. The hollow shock in Richard's eyes instantly ignited into a desperate, cornered fury. He slammed the papers down onto the marble table with a sharp, violent crack. His jaw tightened, and a desperate, ugly shade of red crept back into his gray, exhausted face. He had lost his money, he had lost his house, and he had lost his golden boy, but his massive, fragile ego refused to simply surrender. He reached blindly for the very last weapon he thought he had left in his arsenal. Social pressure. "You cannot do this to us," Richard snarled, his voice finding a fraction of its old, booming authority as he pushed himself up from his chair. "We are your parents, Chloe. We are in our late 60s. You are going to throw us out on the street. You are going to make your elderly parents homeless. Think about what you are doing. The entire neighborhood will know. The country club will know. Society will judge you as a complete monster. No one will ever do business with a woman who throws her own destitute parents into the gutter." Barbara lifted her ruined face from her hands and nodded frantically, desperately clinging to this new manufactured narrative. "He is right, Chloe," she gasped, her voice shrill and trembling with artificial panic. "You will be an absolute pariah. The optics are terrible for a corporate executive like you. You cannot survive the public backlash of evicting your own flesh and blood. People will completely despise you." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not feel a single ounce of fear or hesitation. I simply reached into the tailored pocket of my blazer and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the digital screen and tapped on my encrypted audio recording application. I scrolled down the long list of files until I found the specific one I had saved from earlier this week. It was clearly labeled Fake Contract Meeting. Do you remember the private meeting we had on Tuesday? Richard, I asked, holding the phone up so he could clearly see the bright screen. The one where you thought you were negotiating the final lucrative terms of Tyler's fake logistics contract. The one where you felt so comfortable, so incredibly arrogant, and completely in control of the situation that you decided to tell me exactly what you thought of me and my diverse executive board. I tapped the bright green play button. The audio quality was absolutely flawless. Richard's booming, unfiltered voice filled the sleek, quiet conference room, completely raw and unedited. "I do not care what your board of directors thinks, Chloe," the recorded voice of my father sneered through the high-definition phone speakers. "You are surrounded by affirmative action hires and incompetent diversity quotas. They are nothing but street trash wearing expensive suits. And you are just an ungrateful, unnatural daughter who needs to shut her mouth, sign the corporate check, and remember that you only exist to serve this family's actual legacy. You are a biological disappointment." The vile racist recording echoed sharply off the panoramic glass walls. Barbara gasped loudly, her manicured hand flying to her throat as if she were actively choking on the words. Richard turned the exact color of spoiled milk. His eyes widened in absolute unfiltered horror. He lunged across the wide marble table, his arm reaching out desperately to snatch the phone from my hand, but I calmly stepped back out of his reach. I let the recording finish its vile, abusive tirade before smoothly locking my screen and sliding the phone back into my blazer pocket. I looked at them, my expression completely void of empathy, pity, or basic familial warmth. "You want to talk about optics, Richard?" I asked, my voice dropping to a glacial, uncompromising chill that froze the air in the room. "You want to talk about societal judgment? You are a bankrupt, fraudulent bigot who just got caught on tape hurling racist abuse at a Fortune 500 board of directors. Society will judge whoever I show this to." Richard stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of his chair. All the artificial bravado, all the aggressive posturing, and all the entitled rage completely drained out of him. He was finally utterly defeated. I stepped back up to the table, leaning forward and placing my hands flat on the cool marble. "If you fight this legal eviction, if you try to drag this into the public eye, or if you refuse to leave my property quietly, I will leak this audio file to every single news outlet, country club member, and business associate in this entire city. You will not just be homeless, you will be universally despised and completely radioactive. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your entire pathetic life and get out of my house." 30 days passed with the brutal, unforgiving speed of a falling guillotine. The grand, arrogant facade of the Wilson family did not just crumble, it disintegrated into fine, useless dust. The eviction was executed with clinical precision, forcing my parents and my golden boy brother to relocate to a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the extreme industrial outskirts of the city. The dingy, unwashed walls, the stained linoleum floors, and the constant roar of the nearby highway stood as a harsh daily reminder of their spectacular fall from grace. Richard, a man who once commanded boardrooms and demanded absolute subservience, now spent his days staring blankly out of a smudge-covered window at a bleak strip mall. Tyler, awaiting his inevitable federal indictment, paced the tiny claustrophobic living room like a trapped feral animal, his custom designer suits permanently swapped for wrinkled, unwashed sweatpants. Barbara was reduced to aggressively clipping coupons, her manicured hands trembling as she navigated the harsh, humiliating reality of discount grocery stores. Their social execution had been absolute and swift. Whispers of Tyler's staggering corporate fraud and Richard's vile racist tirade had somehow leaked into the country club ether, turning them into instant radioactive pariahs. Their elite memberships were publicly revoked, Their credit lines were permanently frozen, and their former high society friends treated them like active biological hazards, completely ignoring their desperate phone calls. While they suffocated in the squalor of their own making, I was busy executing the final phase of my absolute liberation. I stood in the sleek, glass-paneled office of my real estate attorney, staring down at the thick stack of closing documents. The property market had been highly aggressive, and I had leveraged every single ounce of my corporate business acumen to secure a flawless, uncompromising deal. I picked up the heavy gold-plated pen and signed my name on the final dotted line with a steady, victorious hand. Within 4 hours, the title company initiated a secure wire transfer directly into my private banking account. The amount was exactly $1.5 million in pure liquid cash. The sprawling mansion that had been used as a psychological weapon against me, the grand estate they had arrogantly tried to steal to cover Tyler's monumental financial crimes, was now completely converted into my own unassailable fortress of wealth. I walked out of that legal office and onto the sunlit sidewalk, feeling a profound, intoxicating weightlessness. Later that evening, the warm, fragrant summer air wrapped around me as I stepped onto the private rooftop balcony of the city's most exclusive French restaurant. The ambiance was an immaculate blend of soft jazz ambient candlelight and the quiet, elegant clinking of expensive crystal. I walked toward a secluded corner table overlooking the glittering panoramic expanse of the downtown skyline. Maya was already seated, radiating a fierce, untouchable energy. She looked entirely reborn. The heavy, suffocating weight of being married to a narcissistic fraud had been entirely lifted from her shoulders. She had ruthlessly expedited the divorce proceedings, cutting through the legal red tape with the precision of a surgeon. The family court judge presented with Maya's meticulous forensic evidence of Tyler's mountain of federal financial crimes had granted her absolute full custody of their son without a single moment of hesitation. Tyler was currently fighting tooth and nail just to secure a public defender for his looming embezzlement trial, leaving Maya completely free to rebuild her life and her son's future on her own uncompromising terms. I slid into the plush velvet chair across from her, a genuine, deeply relaxed smile spreading across my face. A waiter immediately approached our table, silently pouring 2 flutes of an exceptionally rare vintage champagne. We raised our glasses in a quiet, mutual acknowledgement of our shared victory, the crystal catching the ambient light of the city. Just as the crisp, bubbling liquid touched my lips, my cell phone vibrated violently against the polished mahogany table. The caller ID flashed an unknown local number. I set my glass down, a faint spark of curiosity cutting through the celebration. I pressed the phone to my ear, allowing it to go straight to voicemail, then tapped the playback button on the newly arrived audio file. Barbara's voice spilled from the small speaker, completely stripped of its usual arrogant suburban entitlement. It was a pathetic, reedy whine, thick with manufactured tears and desperate, grasping guilt. "Chloe, please." Her voice cracked, the sound echoing with the hollow, depressing acoustics of a cheap apartment hallway. "You have to help us. Your father is having severe chest pains from the stress. Tyler cannot even afford basic legal representation. We cannot afford grocery money this week. I know you sold the house. We saw the public listing close online. You have millions now, Chloe. You cannot just leave your own mother starving in this awful, filthy place. We are your family. Please just wire us a few $1,000s, just enough to eat. I am begging you." I sat perfectly still in the glow of the candlelight, listening to the desperate sobbing sounds of the woman who had spent my entire existence trying to make me feel small, worthless, and entirely disposable. I searched my chest for any lingering trace of biological obligation, any small shred of programmed guilt. I felt absolutely nothing. The lifelong conditioning had been completely and violently broken. I tapped the red trash can icon on my high-definition screen, permanently deleting the pathetic audio file into digital oblivion. With 2 more precise, deliberate taps, I blocked the number, entirely ensuring that her toxic, grasping desperation would never reach my peaceful existence ever again. I placed the phone face down on the table and looked across at Maya. Her dark eyes sparkled with a knowing, triumphant light. She raised her crystal flute, the city lights reflecting brilliantly against the delicate glass. I picked up my own champagne, the cool crystal grounding me in the reality of my absolute freedom. We clinked our glasses together, the delicate chime ringing out clearly over the soft background music. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the crisp, expensive taste wash over me. I smiled, raising the glass one final time to the strong, independent woman sitting across from me, and silently toasted to the truest, most unbreakable form of family, the one you build yourself. The most profound lesson from this story is that shared blood does not entitle anyone to a lifetime of your subjugation. True family is never built on a foundation of conditional love manipulation or financial exploitation. When Chloe severed ties with her toxic parents and brother, she did not just protect her assets, she reclaimed her dignity. We are often taught to endure abuse for the sake of family, but setting absolute boundaries is the ultimate act of survival. You always have the power to define your own trusted circle. Share your personal boundary-setting stories, and please comment below.